Hello guys, welcome to Percy Fiction. So in this video, we will see, what if Percy read Naruto Awakens the power of all dojustu and bloodline? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Eyes in the Storm. The late August air at Montauk was perfect. It was the kind of perfect that felt earned, a stolen breath between a world of monsters and the looming shadow of the fall semester. The sea, Percy's sea, was calm, its rhythmic shushing against the sand a familiar lullaby. He lay on a worn blanket, his head in Annabeth's lap, as she idly threaded her fingers through his salt-stiff hair. Above them, the sky was a canvas of deepening twilight, the first stars beginning to prick through the velvety blue. "You're thinking too loud," Annabeth murmured, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Where the last sliver of sun bled orange and purple. "I can practically hear the gears grinding from here." Percy cracked open an eye. "I'm not grinding. I'm appreciating. There's a difference." "Oh, really?" She smiled, a small, genuine curve of her lips that always made his chest feel a little tight. "And what, pray tell, is the mighty Percy Jackson appreciating so intensely?" "This," he said, gesturing vaguely with one hand to encompass the beach, the sky, the two of them. "No prophecies, no quests, no deranged gods trying to turn me into a guinea pig. Just this. It's nice." "It is," she agreed, her voice softer now. She leaned down, her gray eyes, usually so analytical and stormy, were as calm as the evening tide. She pressed a light kiss to his forehead. "We deserve it." He closed his eyes again, letting the comfortable silence settle around them. It was a rare commodity in their lives. He could feel the steady beat of her heart through the fabric of her t-shirt, a rhythm that grounded him more than the earth beneath them. For the first time in what felt like years, he wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. He was just here. That was his first mistake. The change was subtle at first, a sudden chill in the air that had nothing to do with the setting sun. The waves, which had been gently lapping the shore, began to churn with a nervous energy. Percy sat up, a prickle of unease running down his spine. He could feel it, a deep, resonant wrongness in the water. It was a discordant note in the symphony of the ocean, a pressure building that felt unnatural and violent. "What is it?" Annabeth asked, her hand immediately going to the hilt of the dagger tucked into her waistband. She had felt the shift in him, the instant transition from relaxed teenager to coiled warrior. "I don't know," Percy said, his eyes scanning the darkening horizon. The sky was still clear above them, but out over the water, a bank of clouds was gathering with impossible speed. They were a bruised, sickly purple-black, and lightning, stark white and silent, spider-webbed within them. "But I don't like it." The wind kicked up, whipping sand into their faces and tearing at their clothes. The temperature plummeted. What had been a perfect summer evening had twisted into something menacing in the span of a minute. The waves were no longer waves. They were fists, pounding the shoreline with a furious, relentless rhythm. "That's not a natural storm," Annabeth stated, her voice tight with tension as she stood beside him, her blonde hair a wild banner in the gale. "No kidding," Percy muttered. He drew Riptide, the familiar weight of the pen in his hand a small comfort. He uncapped it, and the bronze blade sprang to life, casting a faint, warm glow in the encroaching gloom. Then the sea exploded. An eruption of water, 100 feet high, shot into the air a quarter-mile offshore. It wasn't a wave, but a displacement, as if something gargantuan had just breached the surface. When the water crashed back down, the thing was revealed. It was a horror born from a mariner's deepest nightmare. Its body was a mass of writhing, scaled tentacles, each as thick as a school bus, coiling and uncoiling around a central, bulbous head. The head itself was a cluster of mismatched eyes, dozens of them, glowing with a malevolent, sickly green light. A gaping maw, filled with teeth like obsidian shards, opened and closed, letting out a sound that wasn't a roar, but a deep, guttural vibration that shook the very bones in their bodies. "Okay," Annabeth said, her voice remarkably steady despite the terrifying spectacle. "New monster. Definitely not in any of my books. Let's try not to get it written into any of them," Percy shot back, his mind racing. He could feel the creature's rage, its primal hunger. through his connection to the sea, but it was different. It felt ancient, wrong, like something that had been sleeping for eons and had woken up on the wrong side of the abyss. One of the tentacles lashed out, moving with a speed that defied its immense size. It wasn't aimed at them, but at the cliffs behind them. Rock and earth exploded, showering the beach with debris. It was a show of power. A declaration. "It's cornering us," Annabeth analyzed, her gray eyes darting between the monster and their surroundings. "Forcing us toward the water. Joke's on him, that's where I'm strongest," Percy said, a familiar, defiant grin touching his lips. He took a step into the churning surf, the cold water swirling around his ankles. He felt the power of the ocean surge into him, a jolt of energy that sharpened his senses and hardened his resolve. "Stay back, I'll handle this." He didn't wait for an argument. He charged into the sea, calling the waves to him. The water responded, rising up to form massive, liquid fists that he sent crashing into the creature. The blows landed with the force of cannonballs, but the monster barely flinched. It shook its massive head, its myriad of eyes fixing on him with an unnerving focus. It was intelligent. It was learning. Another tentacle, this one covered in razor-sharp barbs, swept toward him. Percy vaulted over it, using a wave as a springboard, and landed on the creature's slick, scaled hide. He drove Riptide deep into the flesh, and the monster shrieked, a sound that vibrated through the water and into his very soul. It thrashed wildly, trying to dislodge him. He held on, the storm-tossed sea his chaotic battlefield. He fought with everything he had. He summoned whirlpools, blasted it with currents of pressurized water, and used the waves to propel himself around the beast, a bronze blur against its dark, massive form. But it was relentless. For every gash he carved into its hide, it seemed to grow 2 more tentacles. It was impossibly strong, impossibly resilient. It swatted him away like a fly, sending him skipping across the surface of the water before he crashed into the surf near the shore. He staggered to his feet, coughing up saltwater, his body screaming in protest. Every muscle ached. He could feel his energy reserves dwindling. This thing, it wasn't like the others. It didn't seem to have a weak spot. It was just a mountain of raw, hateful power. "Percy!" Annabeth's cry cut through the roar of the storm. He turned, and his heart froze. While he had been focused on the main body, a smaller, quicker tentacle had snaked out of the water behind him. It had bypassed him completely and was now coiled around Annabeth's ankle, dragging her toward the thrashing chaos of the deep. She hacked at it with her dagger, sparks flying as the blade scraped against its armored hide, but it was too thick, too strong. "No," he breathed. A cold, absolute dread washed over him, colder than any ocean depths. He saw her face, her eyes wide with shock and a flicker of fear she was trying so desperately to hide. He saw the monster's main head turning, its horrible mouth gaping open in anticipation. Everything he was, everything he had fought for, was about to be swallowed by the darkness. And then, something inside him snapped. It wasn't a thought. It wasn't a decision. It was a fundamental, primal rejection of reality. "No, you will not take her." The world didn't just slow down. It fractured. The roaring of the wind, the crashing of the waves, the monster's unholy shriek, it all faded into a dull, distant hum. The spray of the sea hung in the air, each individual droplet a perfect, crystalline sphere. He could see the tentacle pulling Annabeth, the minute ripples of tension in its muscles. The way the sand grains shifted around her struggling feet. His vision, once a chaotic maelstrom of storm and shadow, became preternaturally clear. He saw the monster not as a single entity, but as a network. Lines of energy, a vibrant, sickly green, flowed through its body, converging on a single point deep within its bulbous head. It was a core, a nexus of power he couldn't have possibly seen before. He saw the path the tentacle holding Annabeth would take. He saw the precise angle the other tentacles would move to intercept him if he charged. He saw it all, laid out before him like one of Annabeth's architectural blueprints. And his eyes burned. It was a strange, searing heat behind his eyeballs, not painful, but intensely present. He didn't know what was happening. He didn't care. He moved. There was no wasted motion. He didn't run. He flowed. He ducked under a sweeping barb that he hadn't seen coming a millisecond before but now perceived with absolute certainty. He twisted his body, avoiding a jet of viscous poison spat from the monster's maw, the black liquid sailing past him, sizzling as it hit the sand. He wasn't just dodging. He was moving to where the attacks wouldn't be, his body responding to a threat that, to an outside observer, hadn't even been launched yet. He reached the tentacle holding Annabeth. He didn't hack at it wildly. He saw the energy flowing through it, a faint line, a structural weakness in its composition. He brought Riptide down, not with brute force, but with surgical precision. The blade sank through the tough hide as if it were butter. The tentacle spasmed and fell away, severed completely. He pushed Annabeth back toward the shore. "Get clear," he commanded, his voice sounding strange to his own ears, colder, more focused. He didn't wait to see if she listened. He turned back to the monster, and for the first time, he felt no fear. Only a cold, sharp clarity. The creature reared back, all of its dozens of eyes fixing on him. It felt the change. It recognized the new threat. It unleashed everything. A wall of tentacles, a maelstrom of teeth and claws and poison, descended on him, a single, overwhelming wave of destruction. To Percy, it was a dance. He saw every line, every trajectory. He saw the flow of power, the intent behind each movement. He moved through the storm of limbs, a phantom weaving through a forest of falling trees. He was untouchable. His blade was an extension of his will, each cut precise, disabling, severing the connections of energy he could now so clearly see. He leapt, propelled by a small, controlled wave he hadn't consciously summoned, and landed squarely on the creature's head, right between two of its largest eyes. The monster thrashed, but his footing was sure. He looked down, and for a fleeting moment, saw his reflection in the slick, green surface of one of its giant eyeballs. His own eyes stared back at him, and they were not his own. They were the color of blood, a deep, vibrant crimson, and in each, 3 black tomos spun slowly, lazily, in a perfect circle around his pupils. He didn't have time to process the shock. He knew what he had to do. The core, the nexus of energy deep inside its skull. He raised Riptide with both hands, the bronze glowing with an intense light, and plunged it downward, channeling every ounce of his being, every drop of this strange new power, into that single, decisive strike. He wasn't just stabbing it. He was severing its life force at the source. The monster's shriek was cut short. A wave of pure energy, silent and blindingly white, erupted from its body. The green light in its eyes faded and died. The immense body went limp, its tentacles crashing into the sea with final, convulsive splashes. And then, it began to dissolve, not into golden dust as monsters usually did, but into a foul-smelling, black sludge that was quickly diluted by the churning sea. The storm died as quickly as it had been born. The wind fell away, the unnatural clouds dissipated, and the waves calmed, once again shushing gently against the shore. The only sounds were the pounding of Percy's own heart and the ragged gasps of his breath. He stood on the beach, drenched and swaying, the adrenaline leaving him in a dizzying rush. Riptide was still clutched in his hand, but it felt impossibly heavy. The burning in his eyes subsided, and the world snapped back into its normal speed, its normal colors. Percy. Annabeth's voice was a lifeline. He turned to her. She was safe. Her face was pale, and a long scratch ran down her arm where a piece of flying rock must have caught her, but she was alive. She was safe. The relief was so overwhelming it almost brought him to his knees. He stumbled toward her and collapsed into her arms, the last of his strength giving out. She held him, her grip tight and fierce. "You did it," she whispered into his hair. I've never seen you move like that. As like you knew what it was going to do before it did." He pulled back, his head swimming. I don't know. Something just happened." He looked toward a small tide pool that had formed near their feet. A perfect mirror of the now placid, starry sky. He leaned over it, needing to see. His reflection stared back, his face smudged with grime, his hair a mess. And his eyes were his own. Sea green, normal. Had he imagined it? The crimson, the spinning black marks. "Your eyes," Annabeth said, her voice quiet but intense. She gently cupped his face, her thumb brushing under his eye. "They were red, Percy. Glowing red, with these little things spinning in them. So it was real." It wasn't a hallucination brought on by a near-death experience. It was real. A power he didn't understand had awakened inside him. A power that had let him see the world in a way he couldn't begin to explain. "How do you feel?" she asked, her analytical mind already taking over, assessing him for injuries, for shock. "Drained," he admitted, his voice hoarse. "Like I just ran a marathon and wrestled a hurricane at the same time." He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "But Annabeth, when it had you, I couldn't let it. I would have done anything." Her expression softened. The strategist and warrior receded, and the girl he loved looked back at him, her gray eyes filled with a fierce, unwavering loyalty. "I know," she said. She didn't press him for more answers. She didn't bombard him with theories or questions. She simply accepted it. This was a new variable, a new piece of the puzzle that was their life, and like always, they would solve it together. She helped him to his feet, and they stood there for a long moment, wrapped in each other's arms, the wreckage of the battle a stark reminder of what had just transpired. The fear was gone, replaced by a profound and unsettling uncertainty. This wasn't a god's blessing or a new trick he'd learned with his water powers. This was something else, something alien. Far down the beach, hidden in the deep shadows of the cliffs that the monster had nearly brought down, a figure watched them. It was cloaked in darkness so profound it seemed to drink the moonlight, a patch of absolute nothingness against the gray rock. The figure had seen the entire battle. It had seen the boy's desperation, the impossible burst of speed, and the brief, shocking flare of crimson in his eyes. A low, resonant voice, like the grinding of tectonic plates, whispered into the night, addressed to no one and everyone. "So, it begins. A new player has entered the game. How wonderfully chaotic." The figure smiled, a gesture unseen in the suffocating dark, and then it simply dissolved, not into dust or shadow, but into the very concept of nothingness, leaving the beach to the two demigods and the secrets that now lay between them, as deep and as vast as the sea itself. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. Whispers in the Wood. The drive back to Camp Half-Blood was a blur of strained silence. Annabeth drove his mom's Prius, her knuckles white on the steering wheel, her stormy gray eyes flicking between the road and Percy every few seconds. He sat in the passenger seat, staring out at the passing landscape of Long Island, but not really seeing it. He was turned inward, replaying the fight in his mind. The feeling of the world slowing, the impossible clarity, the burning sensation in his eyes. He could still feel a faint, residual hum behind them, like a machine that had been powered down but was still warm. They'd agreed not to tell Sally. What would they even say? "Hey Mom, had a great time at the beach, fought an uncatalogued eldritch horror, and oh, by the way, my eyes started doing this weird, glowing, super-powered thing. Pass the blue cookies." No, some things you had to figure out on your own. They passed Talia's pine tree, the golden fleece shimmering faintly under the afternoon sun, and coasted down the hill into the valley. Camp Half-Blood looked the same as always. A chaotic, beautiful collection of Greek architecture, strawberry fields, and the constant thrum of demigod energy. But as Percy stepped out of the car, the world felt louder, sharper. He could hear the rhythmic thwack 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 from the archery range with pinpoint clarity, could even distinguish the slightly different sound of Michael Yu's arrows hitting the bullseye from the others. He could smell the forge, not just as a general scent of smoke and hot metal, but he could pick out the tang of celestial bronze, the acrid smell of burning coal, and the faint scent of ozone from one of the Hephaestus kids tinkering with a lightning-infused shield. It was overwhelming, a flood of sensory information he'd never had to process before. "You okay?" Annabeth asked, her voice low as she came to stand beside him. She'd noticed the way he was standing, unnaturally still, his head tilted as if listening to a distant conversation. He forced himself to relax, to filter the noise. "Yeah, just, everything's a little high def all of a sudden." They decided, wordlessly, to play it cool. They reported to the big house, GIV. In Chiron, a heavily edited version of the monster attack. They called it a minor sea serpent, a stray that had wandered too close to shore. They left out the part where it was the size of a city block and nearly indestructible. And they definitely left out the part about his eyes. Chiron listened patiently, His wise, ancient eyes seeming to see more than Percy was telling him, but he didn't press. For now, the next few days were a strange exercise in restraint. Percy tried to act normal, to fall back into the familiar rhythm of camp life. He went to sword practice, but the other campers seemed to be moving in slow motion. He could see every feint, every shift of weight, every subtle tell in their posture before they even began their attack. He had to force himself to get hit, to seem like he was trying. Otherwise he would have disarmed the entire Ares cabin in under 5 minutes. It was exhausting. The whispers started almost immediately. People noticed the change. He was quieter, more observant. He'd win games of Pinnacle in the rec room because he could see the exact moment a player decided which card to play. He'd respond to questions before they were fully asked. It was subtle, but in a place as tightly knit as Camp Half-Blood, subtle changes were dissected and gossiped about with forensic intensity. The breaking point came, as it often did, during a game of Capture the Flag. It was Friday evening. The air was hot and sticky, and the rivalry between the cabins was at its peak. Percy and Annabeth were on the same team, a coalition of Athena, Poseidon, Apollo, and Hermes cabins. Clarisse, naturally, led the opposing force of Ares, Hephaestus, Demeter, and Dionysus. "All right, Jackson," Clarisse sneered as they lined up at the creek, her boar-tusk spear held loosely in her hand. "Try not to cry when we send you back to your mommy's aquarium." The old Percy would have shot back a clever retort about her needing a breath mint. The new Percy just looked at her. He saw the slight tremor in her hand, the way her eyes darted toward her own flag guards, a flicker of insecurity she hid under layers of bravado. He saw it all, and the insult just bounced off. "Just try to keep up, Clarisse," he said, his voice even and calm. Annabeth, standing beside him, gave him a curious look. Chiron, in his centaur form, stomped a hoof. "Heroes, you know the rules. No killing or maiming. Let the game begin." Quote. The conch horn blew, and both sides surged into the woods. Percy's team fanned out, with Annabeth leading a diversionary force to the left flank. Percy took a smaller group, including Travis and Connor Stoll, straight down the middle. The moment he stepped under the canopy of the trees, the sensory overload hit him again, 10 times worse than before. The rustling of 1,000 leaves, the scurrying of 100 unseen animals, the whispers and footsteps of demigods all around him, it was a cacophony that threatened to drown him. He squeezed his eyes shut for a second, a wave of dizziness washing over him. Focus. Just focus. He didn't know how he did it. He didn't will it to happen. It was an instinct, a desperate attempt to find clarity in the chaos. He felt that familiar, strange energy flare behind his eyes, but this time it wasn't the searing heat from the beach. It was a dull, pulsing ache, as if a muscle he never knew he had was being flexed for the first time. When he opened his eyes, the world was gone. In its place was a panoramic, almost 360-degree vista of shimmering silver and gray. The trees were translucent pillars, the rocks faint outlines. And moving through this ghostly landscape were figures of light. Each demigod glowed with a soft, blue energy, a network of lines and points that was brightest in their chest and head. He could see them all. He saw Annabeth's group moving left. He saw Clarisse's main force setting up an ambush by the river. He saw 3 Ares campers hiding in a ditch not 30 feet from his own position, their blue forms practically vibrating with anticipation. He could see everything. "Travis, Connor," he said, his voice a low whisper. "Ditch on the right, 3 of them. Circle around behind them, now." The Stoll brothers looked at him, then at the ditch, their expressions a mixture of confusion and trust. They nodded and melted into the undergrowth. Percy kept moving forward, his pace steady. A moment later, he heard muffled shouts and the clang of bronze on bronze from behind him. First ambush cleared. He was no longer just a warrior, he was a command center. He saw the entire battlefield laid out in his mind. A living, breathing map. He didn't need Annabeth's strategies or Hermes' speed. He had something far more potent, perfect information. He started issuing quiet commands. "Will, there's a sniper in that oak tree to your left. Get behind him. Katie, patrol of 3 coming up on your position, fall back to the creek." His teammates followed his orders without question. To them, It must have seemed like a series of incredibly lucky guesses, but the results were undeniable. They moved through the woods like ghosts, dismantling the enemy's defenses before they were even sprung. He left his team to handle the skirmishes and made a beeline for the enemy flag. He flowed through the trees, a phantom in the ghostly woods of his vision. He saw a tripwire laid across the path and stepped over it without breaking stride. He saw a net trap hanging in the branches above and simply walked around it. The forest itself seemed to be on his side. He reached the clearing where the Ares flag, a bloody spear on a red banner, was planted. As he expected, Clarice was there, standing guard with two of her biggest siblings. They hadn't seen him approach. They were staring out into the woods, expecting a frontal assault. "You're looking the wrong way," Percy said calmly. All three of them spun around, their eyes wide with shock. Clarice recovered first, a furious snarl twisting her face. "Jackson, how did you get past my patrols?" "I walked," Percy replied, his strange, silvery vision still active. He could see the flow of energy in her body, the way she tensed her muscles to charge. It was like watching a recording of something that had already happened. She screamed in rage and lunged, her spear a blur of motion aimed straight for his chest. He didn't raise his sword. He didn't summon a wave. He simply took one step to the side. The spear point hissed past his ear, missing by a fraction of an inch. As her momentum carried her forward, he brought he flat of Riptide's blade up in a gentle arc, tapping her wrist. It was a precise, calculated strike, hitting a nerve point he didn't even know existed. Her fingers went numb, and her spear clattered to the ground. Her two siblings charged from either side. Percy ducked under a wild sword swing from the first, letting the demigod stumble off balance. He deflected a clumsy axe strike from the second, using the opponent's own momentum to spin him around and send him crashing into his brother. The whole exchange took less than 3 seconds. It wasn't a fight, it was a demonstration of physics. He stood before a stunned and disarmed Clarice. The silver world faded, and the vibrant greens and browns of the forest snapped back into focus with a nauseating lurch. The ache in his eyes subsided. He looked at Clarice, whose face was a mask of disbelief and humiliation. He walked past her, pulled the Ares flag from the ground, and started the casual walk back to the creek. The game was over. They had won in less than 10 minutes, a new camp record. His teammates met him at the boundary line, cheering and hoisting him on their shoulders. They were ecstatic, amazed. But Percy saw the looks on their faces. It wasn't just celebration, it was awe, bordering on fear. How had he done that? The losing team was less enthused. "Cheat," one of the Ares kids yelled, pointing a trembling finger at him. He had to have cheated. He knew where we all were. "No way you took me down that fast, Jackson." Clarice shoved her way through the crowd, her face flushed with anger. "What did you do? Used some new water trick? Had a spy?" Quote. Percy slid off his teammate's shoulders, his expression unreadable. He felt Annabeth's presence at his side, a silent, supportive anchor. He met Clarice's furious gaze. He could have argued. He could have gloated. Instead, he just told her the simple, unnerving truth. "I just saw what you were going to do, Clarice. That's all." His calmness seemed to infuriate her more than any insult could have. It was a dismissal. It rendered her strength, her rage, her entire identity as a warrior, completely irrelevant. She looked like she wanted to hit him, but she hesitated. A flicker of genuine uncertainty in her eyes. "What do you do when your opponent isn't playing the same game as you?" She finally just growled in frustration and stormed off, her siblings trailing behind her. As the crowd began to disperse, Percy caught a glimpse of Chiron standing near the big house, his arms crossed over his chest, his expression deeply troubled. Their eyes met across the field. And Percy knew this wasn't over. He also noticed something else. 2 of the older Hermes campers, ones he didn't know well, weren't celebrating. They were standing near the edge of the woods, watching him. Their expressions weren't angry or odd. They were cold, analytical, calculating, as if they weren't looking at a fellow camper, but at a problem that needed to be solved. When they saw him looking, they exchanged a quick glance and melted back into the crowd. A shiver, completely unrelated to the evening chill, traced a path down Percy's spine. Later that night, long after the campfire sing-along had ended, He met Annabeth at the canoe lake. The moon cast a silver path across the still water, and the only sound was the chirping of crickets. Sharingan and Byakugan, she said without preamble. She was holding a worn, dog-eared paperback book. The cover had a picture of a blonde-haired kid in an orange jumpsuit. It was one of the manga the Stoll brothers had been passing around the camp. Percy blinked. What? The powers. The eyes, she said, her voice filled with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. I've been reading. The red eyes with the tomo, the ones you used at the beach. They're called the Sharingan. It grants the user incredible perception and the ability to predict movements. The ones tonight, the all-seeing white eyes. Byakugan. It gives a near 360-degree field of vision and the ability to see through objects. Percy stared at her, then at the ridiculous-looking book. You're telling me, I'm getting my powers from a comic book. It's not a comic book, it's manga. She corrected automatically. And I don't know how, Percy. But it's too much of a coincidence. The descriptions match perfectly. It's like, the concepts from this story are somehow manifesting in you. He sank down onto the dock, his head in his hands. It didn't make any sense. He was a son of Poseidon. His powers came from the sea, from his father. This was something else entirely. Something foreign and inexplicable. I couldn't control it, he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. Either of them. They just happened. And I don't know how to make them happen again, or how to stop them. Quote. Annabeth sat down next to him, her shoulder pressing against his. Then we'll figure it out. We'll practice. We'll learn. We'll do it together. He looked at her, at the absolute certainty in her gray eyes, and felt a surge of gratitude so strong it almost hurt. He was scared. He was confused. He was wielding powers he didn't understand that were isolating him from his friends. But he wasn't alone. He leaned his head on her shoulder, and together they watched the moon on the water, two demigods against a world of uncertainty. The whispers in the wood had faded for the night. But they both knew they were just the beginning. A new game had started, with new rules they had yet to learn, and Percy was at the very center of it. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Bone Forest. The quest came 3 days after the disastrous game of Capture the Flag. Percy had been trying to keep his head down, spending most of his time at the sparring arena, trying to replicate the impossible clarity of his new vision without success. The harder he tried to access it, the more elusive it became. It was like trying to catch smoke. All he got were splitting headaches and the concerned, pitying looks of his fellow campers. The whispers had grown louder, morphing from simple gossip into a current of unease that followed him everywhere he went. He was no longer just Percy Jackson, hero of Olympus. He was Percy Jackson, the guy who did that weird thing in the woods. So when Chiron summoned him, Annabeth, and Grover to the big house, it was almost a relief. A quest, at least, was a problem he knew how to solve. Or so he thought. They sat around the pinnacle table with Chiron and Mr. D, who looked even more bored than usual. Chiron laid a map of a national park in upstate New York on the table. 3 hikers have gone missing in the Adirondacks over the past 2 weeks, Chiron began, his expression grave. Mortals, all of them. Normally, this wouldn't be our concern. But the local satyrs have sent panicked reports. They say the forest is sick. The spirit of the place is wrong. They're afraid to enter. Grover, seated next to Percy, shivered, his DS fidgeting with the hem of his t-shirt. A sick forest. That's bad, Chiron. Really bad. For satyrs to be scared, it must feel like walking on broken glass. Precisely, Chiron said. One of them, a brave young satyr named Philemon, ventured in to investigate. He has not returned. I want the 3 of you to go, find out what is causing this disturbance, and if possible, find the missing hikers and our satyr. Mr. D yawned theatrically. Yes, go poke the angry trees. And try not to get turned into lawn furniture. It's terribly gauche. Percy ignored him. He looked at the map, a sense of foreboding settling in his gut. This felt different from the usual monster of the week gig. The sickness Chiron described, it reminded him of the unnatural pressure he'd felt in the water just before the monster attacked at Montauk. A deep, fundamental wrongness. We'll do it, Annabeth said, her voice firm as she studied the map, already plotting routes and potential ambush points. The trip north was quiet. Argus dropped them at the edge of the park, and as they stepped out of the van, the feeling hit them. It was a profound and oppressive silence. Not the peaceful quiet of nature, but an empty, dead silence where the buzz of insects and the chatter of birds should have been. The air was heavy, still, and smelled faintly of dust and decay. "Whoa," Grover breathed, his face pale. He took a tentative step onto the trail, then winced. "It's worse than I thought. It's silent. The earth isn't singing. It's just there, like a body without a soul." Percy could feel it too. It was a void. He tried to reach out with his senses, to feel the moisture in the trees, the life in the undergrowth, but there was nothing. It was like trying to connect to a dead battery. Annabeth drew her dagger, her gray eyes scanning the unnaturally still woods. "Stay sharp. Whatever's in here, it's powerful enough to mute an entire forest." They moved cautiously down the trail, the only sound the crunch of their own footsteps on the dry, brittle leaves. The deeper they went, the more unsettling it became. The trees themselves looked wrong. Their bark was pale and cracked, their leaves a sickly, anemic green. There were no animal tracks, no signs of life at all. It was a forest holding its breath. After an hour of walking, Grover stopped dead, his goat-like legs trembling. "Oh, Pan," he whispered, his eyes wide with horror. Percy and Annabeth followed his gaze. Just off the trail, half hidden by a withered fern, was a statue of a rabbit. It was perfectly rendered, its ears perked, its nose twitching. Caught in a moment of startled awareness. But it wasn't stone. It was a pale, fibrous material that looked disturbingly like petrified wood. Annabeth knelt, touching it cautiously with the tip of her dagger. "This isn't magic I recognize. It's not a Gorgon's gaze. The texture, it's like it was turned to wood, then the life was just sucked out of it." A cold knot formed in Percy's stomach. They moved on, their pace quicker now, a shared sense of urgency pushing them forward. Soon, they found another one. A deer, its head raised in alarm, its body a sculpture of dead wood. Then a fox, a whole family of raccoons. The forest was a macabre gallery of frozen life. And then they found the first hiker. He was sitting on a log, his backpack still on, a half-eaten granola bar in his hand. His face was a mask of confusion, his eyes wide, his mouth slightly open as if in mid-sentence. He was made of the same pale, dead wood as the animals. Grover let out a choked sob and turned away. Annabeth's face was a grim, stony mask, but Percy could see the horror in her eyes. This wasn't a monster killing for food or territory. This was something else, something that didn't just kill, but erased. It turned life into a silent, dead monument. "This is Erebus's work," Percy said, the name leaving a bitter taste in his mouth. He didn't know how he knew, but the certainty was absolute. This silent, ordered death. This perfect, horrifying stillness, it was the calling card of a primordial god of darkness. "We have to find the source," Annabeth said, her voice steely. She pointed her dagger further down the trail. "That way. The wrongness, it feels stronger over there." They moved into a small clearing, and there they found them. The other two missing hikers and the satyr, Philemon, were clustered together. Their wooden bodies arranged as if in a strange tableau. And in the center of the clearing stood the source of the sickness. It was a tree, a massive, ancient-looking oak. But its bark was the color of bone, and its leaves were a deep, Venus black. It seemed to pulse with a faint, dark light, and the ground around it was cracked and barren. Standing before it as a figure that might have once been a woman. She was tall and slender, her skin the same bone white as the tree's bark, her hair a cascade of the same black leaves. She looked like a dryad, a nature spirit, but she had been twisted, corrupted into something horrifying. Her eyes were hollow sockets from which the same dark energy pulsed. When she spoke, her voice was the rustle of dead leaves on a tombstone. More life, more vibrant, chaotic, noisy life, come to be silenced, come to be perfected. "Let them go," Percy demanded, raising Riptide. The corrupted dryad tilted her head, a slow, unnatural movement. "Go. They have not gone anywhere. They are here, at peace, free from the burden of choice and the chaos of emotion. I have given them a gift. It's a curse," Grover spat, managing to find a sliver of bravery through his terror. "Your perspective is limited," the dryad rasped. Soon, the whole world will be given this gift. My master will return it to its proper state. Order, silence, and I am but a humble gardener, planting the seeds of his new world. She raised a hand, and the ground at their feet erupted. Gnarled, woody roots, sharp as spears, shot out of the earth. They dodged and weaved, the roots chasing them, trying to ensnare them. Percy sliced through them with riptide, but for every one he cut, 2 more grew in its place. Annabeth used her wits, luring the into tangles around the healthy trees at the edge of the clearing. Grover played a frantic, panicked tune on his reed pipes, a song of life that made the dead roots recoil slightly, but it was weak, strained. Percy activated his Sharingan. The world sharpened, the motion of the roots becoming predictable. He moved with a new grace, his blade a bronze arc of destruction, but it wasn't enough. The Dryad wasn't even moving. She was just standing there, a conductor of this wooden orchestra of death. He needed to get to her. He saw an opening, a split-second gap in the root storm, and charged. He was almost upon her when the bone-white tree behind her pulsed with dark energy. A wall of interlaced branches, thicker than his body, erupted from the ground in front of him, blocking his path. He slammed into it, the impact rattling his teeth. "Percy!" Annabeth yelled. He turned. She was in trouble. While his charge had drawn the Dryad's attention, a cluster of roots had snaked around, cornering Annabeth against a rock face. She fought brilliantly, her dagger a blur, but she was being overwhelmed. A single, thick root shot forward, faster than the others, and wrapped around her leg, its woody tendrils tightening. Thorns digging into her skin. She cried out in pain, her dagger clattering to the ground as she was lifted into the air. The strategist, the Dryad rasped, a sound that might have been a chuckle. So much noise in that one's head. It will be a pleasure to silence it. The root began to drag a struggling Annabeth toward the pulsating, bone-white tree. Percy saw red. The same cold, absolute dread from the beach washed over him, but this time it was mixed with a white-hot, volcanic rage. The carefully constructed walls of control he'd been building for the past week shattered into a million pieces. No, not again. Never again. He didn't activate the Sharingan. He didn't try to summon the Byakugan. This was something deeper. A raw, primal power that answered to nothing but his own will to protect. A searing pain, sharp and clean, erupted from his shoulder blades, his forearms, his shins. It felt like his bones were on fire, grinding and reshaping themselves under his skin. With a guttural roar that was more animal than human, he threw himself at the wall of branches. As he moved, his own body became the weapon. Pale, ivory-colored bones, sharp as razors and hard as diamond, erupted from his flesh. 2 massive, curved spurs of bone burst from his back, tearing through his T-shirt. A blade of bone, serrated and cruel, slid out from along his right ulna, extending a foot past his fist. His knuckles sprouted sharp, bony protrusions. He didn't just break through the wall of wood, he annihilated it. His bone spurs shredded the thick branches into splinters. He drove his forearm blade deep into the trunk of another root, and with a twist, shattered it from the inside out. He was a whirlwind of ivory and bronze, a living engine of destruction. The Dryad, for the first time, showed something akin to surprise. Her hollow sockets fixed on him. What are you?" Percy didn't answer. His sea-green eyes were blazing with a terrifying light. He saw the root holding Annabeth. And he moved. He was a blur, faster than he'd ever been. He leapt, the bone spurs on his shins digging into the ground for traction, and in midair, he spun, using nay of the massive bone blades on his back like a scythe. The blades sliced through the thick root with a sickening crack. Annabeth fell, and Grover, shaking off his stupor, scrambled to catch her. Hey! RCY landed in a crouch between them and the Dryad, his body a bristling arsenal of his own skeletal structure. The pain was immense, a constant, sharp agony, but his rage and adrenaline drowned it out. "You will not touch her," he growled. His voice a low, dangerous rumble. The Dryad seemed to hesitate, to recoil from the sheer, raw violence of his transformation. She was a being of quiet, ordered death. He was a being of chaotic, visceral battle. He was anathema to her. The master must know of this, she hissed, and then she dissolved, her body melting back into the bone-white tree. The tree itself pulsed once. A violent wave of dark energy that threw Percy back, and then it withered, collapsing in on itself until it was nothing more than a pile of white dust. As the tree died, so did its magic. The roots crumbled into lifeless wood. A faint green light returned to the leaves on the surrounding trees. A bird, somewhere in the distance, tentatively chirped. Life was returning to the forest. And in the sudden, echoing silence, Percy was left on his knees, panting, the horrifying bone protrusions still jutting from his body. He looked down at his arm, at the blade of his own bone fused to his skin. And a wave of nausea and self-disgust washed over him. What had he done? What had he become? He heard a gasp. He looked up. Grover was staring at him, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. He was looking at Percy as if he were the monster. But Annabeth, she was on her feet, leaning on Grover for support, her leg bleeding, her face pale with shock. But her eyes were not filled with fear. After the initial wave of horrified surprise, her expression had shifted. She limped forward, ignoring Grover's attempt to hold her back. Percy, she breathed. He flinched as she reached out a trembling hand. He was afraid to let her touch him, afraid this monstrous form would somehow taint her. But her fingers didn't recoil. They gently, cautiously, traced the edge of the bone blade on his forearm. Her touch was as light as a feather. Incredible, she whispered, her architect's mind overriding her fear. The density is remarkable. It's like living celestial bronze. How is it anchored? Is it directly from the periosteum? Is the calcium structure altered? Percy could only stare at her, dumbfounded. He was a walking nightmare, a creature of bone and rage, and she was analyzing him. He felt the tension in his body release, and with it, the power. The bone protrusions retracted, sliding back under his skin with a sickening, grinding sound that was somehow worse than their eruption. The process was agonizing, and he collapsed onto the forest floor, his body screaming in protest, his t-shirt a shredded ruin. Annabeth was instantly at his side, helping him sit up. Are you okay? Does it hurt? Like you wouldn't believe, he croaked, his throat raw. He looked at Grover, who was still standing several feet away, looking like he was about to bolt. Grover, that wasn't natural, Percy. The satyr stammered. That was wrong. I know, Percy said quietly, the shame hitting him full force. He looked at Annabeth, expecting to see a flicker of that same fear in her eyes. But it wasn't there. There was concern, worry, and a fierce, burning intensity, but not fear. She met his gaze, and her voice was soft, but unyielding. You saved me, Percy. That's all that matters. She helped him to his feet, her arm around his waist, supporting him. Come on. We need to get you back to camp. As they limped out of the slowly reviving forest, leaving the wooden statues of the dead behind them, Percy leaned on Annabeth, his body broken and his mind in turmoil. He had saved her. He had defeated the monster. But he had done it by unleashing a monster within himself. And as he looked at the fear in his best friend's eyes, he had to wonder if it was a monster he would ever be able to control. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. A Game of Gods. The aftermath of the bone forest was a quiet, gnawing poison. Percy's body healed quickly, a perk of being a son of Poseidon, but the psychological wounds were deeper. He'd wake up in his cabin in a cold sweat, the phantom sensation of bones sliding under his skin still fresh in his mind. He avoided the sparring arena. The thought of drawing riptide, of fighting, felt dangerous. What if he lost control again? What if the bone and rage monster was now a permanent part of him, lurking just beneath the surface? Grover wouldn't meet his eyes. His best friend, who had faced down titans and furies, now flinched when Percy came too near. It was a constant, painful reminder of the horror he had unleashed. The whispers around camp had changed, too. They were no longer tinged with our suspicion, but with genuine fear. He was isolated, a king in a kingdom of one, his only solace the unwavering presence of Annabeth. She was his rock, his research partner, his anchor to sanity. They spent hours in the empty Athena cabin, poring over the worn pages of the Naruto manga she'd borrowed from the Stoll brothers. Shikatsumiku, she murmured one afternoon, tracing a finger over a panel depicting a white-haired man with bones protruding from his body. It means dead bone pulse. The ability to manipulate one's own skeletal structure. It's classified as a kekkei genkai, a bloodline trait. But that doesn't make any sense. It's not in your bloodline. Tell me about it, Percy muttered, staring at his own hands. They looked normal, but he knew what they were capable of. Maybe it's a curse. It's not a curse, she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. It's a variable we don't understand yet. Curses have intent. This feels more like a fundamental change in your spiritual DNA, if that's even a thing. She looked at him, her gray eyes serious. But it's reactive, Percy. Both times your most powerful abilities have manifested, it was when I was in danger. It's tied to your emotions. Your will to protect. He wanted to believe her, but the memory of Grover's terrified face was a difficult stain to wash out. He was walking back to his cabin, the weight of it all pressing down on him, when the sky cracked open. A bolt of lightning, thicker than the mast of the Argo II and brighter than the sun, slammed into the center of the volleyball court. It didn't dissipate. It held, a throbbing, incandescent pillar of pure energy connecting the heavens and the earth. Campers screamed and dove for cover. The air crackled with ozone, and the smell of a celestial thunderstorm filled the valley. From the heart of the lightning, a figure stepped out. Hermes stood there, his running shoes smoking slightly, his face devoid of its usual mischievous humor. He looked grave, his caduceus staff silent in his hand. George and Martha's snake heads retracted in deference. The lightning pillar vanished, leaving behind a circle of scorched, glassy sand. The entire camp had frozen. Everyone was staring. Hermes's gaze swept over the crowd and landed on Percy. There was no ambiguity in his expression. "Perseus Jackson," he announced, his voice booming with an authority Percy had never heard from him before. "By order of Zeus, Lord of the heavens, you are summoned to Olympus." Immediately, there was no room for discussion. This was not a request. It was a royal decree. Percy's stomach turned to ice. He looked over and saw Annabeth running toward him, her face pale with alarm. She reached his side just as he started walking toward Hermes. "What is this?" she demanded of the god. "Why is he being summoned like a criminal?" Hermes's expression softened slightly as he looked at her. "I'm just the messenger, Annabeth. But, be smart about this, Percy. The air on Olympus is heavy today." He placed a hand on Percy's shoulder. "Hold on." Before Percy could say goodbye to Annabeth, the world dissolved into a blinding white light and a roar of sound. He fell, like he was being ripped apart and put back together at the molecular level. When his vision cleared, he was standing in the center of the throne room of the gods. And Hermes was right. The air was heavy. The throne room was usually a place of chaotic energy, of booming arguments and divine laughter. Today, it was silent. Deathly silent. The 12 Olympians were in their massive thrones, but they weren't lounging or bickering. They were sitting upright, their expressions ranging from grim to hostile. The central hearth, usually roaring with a warm, welcoming fire, was a low, sullen bed of coals that seemed to suck the warmth from the room. Percy stood alone in the vast space, riptide in his pocket, feeling very small and very mortal. He remembered Annabeth's frantic, last-minute advice as she had run to his side. "Don't rise to Ares's bait. Appeal to Athena's logic. Show Poseidon respect but firmness. And whatever you do, do not look away from Zeus." He forced himself to stand straight, to meet the collective gaze of the gods. His heart was hammering against his ribs, but he pushed down the fear. He needed to be in control. He needed to see. He let the familiar energy flare behind his eyes, just a flicker. The Sharingan activated, not as a blazing beacon, but as a subtle shift in his perception. The world sharpened. He didn't just see the gods, he perceived them. He saw the crackling aura of impatience around Zeus, a thundercloud of white-hot power barely contained. He saw the shimmering, complex patterns of Athena's aura, a web of logic and strategy. He saw the dull red, brutish glow of Ares, pulsing with a simple, direct desire for violence. And he saw his father. Poseidon's aura was a deep, turbulent blue-green, churning with conflict and worry. He was a storm held in check. "Perseus Jackson." Zeus's voice was the rumble of distant thunder, a sound that promised a storm to come. He leaned forward in his throne, his master bolt resting against his knee. "We have observed anomalies. Disturbances in the mortal world that seem to originate with you. I've been dealing with threats to the camp, Lord Zeus, Percy said, his voice steady. He kept his gaze locked on Zeus's eyes. Just as Annabeth had told him. Ares let out a harsh laugh. Threats. I heard you took out a whole squad of my kids and capture the flag without breaking a sweat. I heard you crowded bones and tore apart some kind of tree freak. That's not dealing with threats, punk. That's a demonstration. For one, I'm impressed. The red glow around him pulsed brighter. He wants me to embrace the violence. To show him the monster. Percy ignored him. The situations were under control. Under your control. Hera's voice was like ice. A demigod wielding power we have never seen, power that is not of our world. Is the very definition of out of control. Her aura was a cold, hard gold, brittle and sharp. She sees me as an impurity, a flaw in her perfect order. Where did this power come from? Athena's question cut through the emotion, her voice a sharp, analytical blade. She leaned forward, her gray eyes, so much like Annabeth's, filled with an intense, unnerving curiosity. Her aura was a focused, silver light. She doesn't care about the threat. She wants the data. She wants to understand the mechanics. I don't know, Percy answered honestly. It was the riskiest play. But lying to a room full of gods while trying to keep his own powers a secret was a fool's game. You don't know, Zeus repeated, his voice dangerously soft. He stroked his beard, his eyes narrowing. Percy saw a flicker in his aura. A shadow, a distortion that wasn't his own. It was a fleeting, inky blackness, like a drop of oil in water. Something's influencing him. It manifested recently, Percy explained, keeping his tone even. It appears when my friends are in mortal danger. How noble, Zeus sneered. And what are these abilities? We have received reports of precognition. Of strange, all-seeing eyes. Of a power to command your very skeleton. These are not the gifts of the sea god. He shot a glare at Poseidon. His father finally spoke, his voice the deep rumble of the ocean floor. Percy is my son, brother. He has always been loyal to Olympus. He has saved us all, more than once. You cannot hold his bravery against him. His aura churned, a protective wall of deep blue. He's defending me, but he's just as lost as I am. I do not hold his past deeds against him, Zeus thundered, his own aura flaring violently. I hold his future against him. I hold this unknown, untraceable power against all of us. He stood, his full 12-foot divine form radiating immense power. The shadows in the room seemed to deepen. The inky blackness in his aura swirled again, more potent this time. And Percy heard it, not with his ears, but with the strange perception of the Sharingan, a whisper, slithering at the edge of Zeus's consciousness, an ancient prophecy, a demigod who wields the eyes of blood and bone, the one who will cast down the gods and bring silence. Erebus, he was here, not in body, but as a poison in the ear of the most paranoid god in existence. There are whispers, Zeus said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial growl, his eyes wild. Old words, from before our time. Of a god-killer, a mortal who would inherit a power that could unmake creation itself. A power that begins with eyes of blood. A heavy silence fell over the throne room. The gods were staring at Percy, their expressions a mixture of fear and suspicion. He was being tried and convicted for a crime he hadn't committed, based on a prophecy he'd never heard of, whispered by an enemy they didn't even know existed. He was trapped. Arguing would be pointless. Denying it would be seen as a lie. He had one move. Annabeth's voice echoed in his head. Appeal to Athena's logic. Change the narrative. A god-killer, Percy said, letting a humorless smile touch his lips. You think I'm here to kill you? Lord Zeus, if I wanted you dead, I'd be doing a much worse job of it. A few of the gods, Apollo and Hermes among them, flinched at his audacity. Ares just grinned wider. Percy pressed his advantage, his gaze sweeping the room before landing back on Zeus. You're worried about the wrong enemy. You talk about whispers. I've been on the ground, fighting the source of them. At Montauk, I fought a creature that felt older than the sea itself. In the Adirondacks, I faced a corrupted spirit who spoke of a master, who wanted to bring silence and order to the world by turning everything into dead monuments. She called it a gift. A perfection. He took a step forward, his voice ringing with a conviction that came from seeing the truth firsthand. There's a new power rising. A primordial one. Something that is poisoning your world from the roots up. And my new abilities, as strange and as frightening as they are the only things that have been able to stop it. So why? Oh, you can sit here and worry about old prophecies whispered by the shadows, or you can look at the real, tangible threat that is already at your door. Athena's aura pulsed with silver light. He had her. The logic was sound. She saw the pattern, the connection between the events. Poseidon's aura calmed, the turbulent storm finding a direction. He saw a way to defend his son by focusing on a common enemy. But Zeus was still in the grip of the shadow. Lies. He bellowed, the master bolt in his hand crackling with power. A clever misdirection. You would have us chase phantoms while you amass your power in the shadows. Is that what you really believe? Percy asked, his voice cutting through the rage. Or is that what the darkness is telling you to believe? He deactivated his Sharingan. He didn't need it for this. He needed Zeus to see him. Percy Jackson. The kid who returned his bolt. The kid who fought Kronos. Look at me, Zeus, he said, his voice quiet but firm. I am not your enemy. The thing that is whispering in your ear, that is feeding your fear. That is your enemy. That is our enemy. Zeus faltered. The master bolt's crackling subsided. For a single, breathless moment, Percy's words seemed to have cut through the primordial paranoia. The king of the gods looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw not a god-killer, but a demigod who was tired, scared, and standing his ground against impossible odds. But the moment passed. The shadow in his aura swirled, and his expression hardened again into a mask of cold authority. Your fate is not yet decided, Perseus Jackson, Zeus declared. His voice flat and devoid of emotion. But you are now on a leash. Your every move will be watched. Every flicker of this unnatural power will be noted. The moment we deem you a threat, the moment, you will be erased. Consider this your only warning. He waved a hand dismissively. You are dismissed. Hermes reappeared at Percy's side, his expression unreadable. He placed a hand on Percy's shoulder. And once again, the world dissolved. He reappeared in the same spot he had left, by the scorched circle on the volleyball court. Annabeth was right there, her arms crossed, her face a storm of anxiety. The entire camp was still gathered, watching from a distance. What happened? She asked immediately, her voice a tense whisper. Percy looked at her, then at the curious and fearful faces of his fellow campers, then up at the sky, where the sun seemed a little dimmer than before. I bought us some time, he said, his voice heavy. But we're in a new game now. And the gods aren't the only ones playing. He had walked into the throne room a demigod hero. He left it a person of interest, a potential enemy of the state, a ticking time bomb in the eyes of the most powerful beings in the world. And the worst part was, he wasn't entirely sure they were wrong. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Rinnegan's Path. The leash Zeus had put on him was invisible, but Percy felt its weight every second. He was a walking storm cloud in the sunny valley of Camp Half-Blood. Demigods would part ways for him as he walked by, their conversations dropping to hushed whispers. The younger campers looked at him with wide, fearful eyes. Even his own cabin felt empty, a monument to a father who was now forced to watch him from a distance. The only place he felt a sliver of normalcy was with Annabeth. But even that was laced with a new, strange tension. They were at the arena, the mid-morning sun beating down on the hard-packed earth. Annabeth, ever the strategist, was trying to approach his new powers like a complex equation. Okay, try again, she instructed, standing a safe distance away. Focus on me. Don't think about anything else. Just try to see what I'm going to do next. Percy closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and focused. He tried to summon the burning sensation of the Sharingan, the cool, pulsing ache of the Byakugan. Nothing. All he got was the family. Sting of sweat in his eyes and a budding headache. He opened them in frustration. It's no use, he grumbled, kicking at a loose stone. It only happens when I'm not thinking about it. When I'm about to lose something. He looked at her, his sea-green eyes clouded with a frustration that went deeper than their failed training session. It's a weapon of last resort, Annabeth. And I don't know how to control what it does when it comes out. Everything can be controlled, Percy. Everything can be understood, she insisted, though her voice lacked its usual certainty. She held up the manga, its cover now creased and worn. According to this, the Sharingan can evolve. It requires intense emotion, a trauma, the loss of a loved one. Her voice trailed off, and the unspoken words hung in the air between them. He had awakened it when he thought he was going to lose her. The thought sent a chill down his spine. What kind of power was fueled by trauma? Their session was cut short by the sound of the conch horn. Blown in 3 sharp, panicked blasts. The emergency signal. It hadn't been used in over a year. They exchanged a single, grim look and sprinted out of the arena. Campers were pouring from the cabins and activity centers, all heading toward Half-Blood Hill. The air was thick with confusion and the metallic tang of fear. Percy pushed through the crowd, Annabeth at his heels, until he could see the source of the commotion. The magical barrier that protected the camp was flickering over the northern border, near the woods. It shimmered like a heat haze, spitting sparks. Before a 20-foot section of it simply died. It vanished, leaving a gaping, vulnerable hole in their defenses. And through that hole, figures were advancing. They weren't monsters. They were people, clad in sleek, black tactical gear that seemed to absorb the light. They moved with a disciplined, military precision that was utterly alien to the chaotic, individualistic fighting style of demigods. They carried weapons that were a terrifying fusion of mortal and mythic. Assault rifles that spat glowing celestial bronze bullets, nets woven with the energy-draining threads of Stygian iron, and strange, disc-like objects they threw with unnerving accuracy. Clarice, already at the front line with her Ares cabin, let out a furious war cry and charged. For Ares, it was a slaughter. The intruders didn't meet her charge. They simply raised their rifles. The sound wasn't a thunderous roar, but a series of sharp, suppressed PHUTS. Clarice's shield, a gift from her father, deflected the first few rounds. But others slammed into her breastplate, the force of the impact staggering her. 2 of her siblings went down, crying out in pain as the bronze bullets tore through their armor. The intruders threw the discs, which exploded in a flash of blinding light and a disorienting, high-frequency screech. The Ares warriors, their senses overwhelmed, stumbled back, confused and vulnerable. This wasn't a battle, it was an extermination. They're using combined arms tactics, Annabeth breathed, her mind working at lightning speed. They're countering our strengths, light and sound to disrupt our senses, ranged weapons to nullify our close quarters advantage. Who are they? Percy didn't need to ask. He knew. This cold, efficient, and lethal approach, it was mortals, demigods even, who had rejected the old ways. God killers. Get the archers on the ridge. Annabeth commanded, taking charge. We need to lay down suppressing fire. Hephaestus' cabin. We need mobile shields, now. Percy drew Riptide and plunged into the fray. He was a whirlwind of bronze, a force of nature against their cold technology. He deflected bullets, the impacts jarring his arm, and cut down their nets before they could be thrown. But they were smart. They didn't engage him one-on-one. They fell back, luring him forward, while others fired at him from the flanks. They were trying to hurt him, to trap him. He was fast, but he wasn't faster than a bullet. He felt a searing pain in his shoulder as one of the bronze rounds clipped him, tearing through his armor and shirt. The wound was shallow, but it was a shock. He wasn't invincible. He saw the leader then. This one wasn't wearing a helmet. A young woman, maybe a few years older than him, with short-cropped black hair and eyes that burned with a cold, zealous fire. A long, jagged scar ran down the left side of her face. She held a pistol in one hand and a celestial bronze short sword in the other, a perfect, terrifying blend of the two worlds. She pointed at him, not with her sword, but with her chin, issuing a silent command to her squad. They converged. Percy found himself fighting for his life, pushed back, forced onto the defensive. He was powerful, but they were a unit, a well-oiled machine of death. He glanced over his shoulder, a desperate need to know where Annabeth was, and his heart stopped. The leader, the woman with the scar, had used his distraction. She had bypassed him and was making a beeline for the command post Annabeth had set up behind a small rise. She was flanking them, going for the brain of the operation. With her were 2 of her biggest soldiers, and they were closing the distance with terrifying speed. Several young Apollo campers, caught between them and Annabeth, drew their bows, their faces pale with terror. Annabeth! He screamed. He tried to push through, but two of the god killers threw themselves at him, not to fight, but to hold him, to tie him up for just a few precious seconds. It was a suicide play. And they did it without hesitation. He saw the scarred woman raise her pistol. He saw the fear in the young camper's eyes. He saw Annabeth, her dagger out, her face set in a grim mask of determination. Ready to fight a battle she couldn't possibly win. The world shattered. It wasn't a choice. It wasn't an act of will. It was a scream from the deepest, most primal part of his soul. The power didn't just burn behind his eyes, it detonated. The headache he'd had earlier exploded into a blinding, white-hot agony that ripped through his skull. He felt something break, something tear, something fundamental inside him rewriting itself. His vision went black, and then it returned, but the world he saw was not the one he had left. The color was gone, replaced by a world of infinite, detailed gray. But through it all, he saw it. A new spectrum. The vibrant, living energy that flowed through the demigods, the faint, dying energy of the grass, the malevolent, humming energy of the god-killer's weapons. It was a river of power, a current that connected everything. Chakra. His eyes had changed. He didn't need a mirror to know. The Sharingan's red was gone. He could feel the new pattern there, a strange, concentric circle design, like ripples in a pond. The Rinnegan. He didn't know what it was called. He only knew what it could do. The two soldiers holding him were still grappling with him. He didn't push them away. He simply raised his right hand, palm open. Shinra Tensai. The name came to him unbidden, a whisper from a forgotten life. An invisible, omnidirectional wave of absolute force erupted from his body. It wasn't a push of water or wind. It was a distortion of reality itself. The two soldiers holding him were blasted backward as if hit by a freight train. Their bodies rag-dolling through the air. The wave expanded, hitting the rest of the encroaching squad, sending them flying. It ripped trees from the ground, tore up the earth and sea. Reeded a perfect circle of devastation around him, 20 yards in every direction. A dead, ringing silence fell over the battlefield. Everyone, camper and god killer alike, stopped fighting. They all stared at Percy, standing untouched in the center of his own personal crater. The scarred woman, who had been thrown off her feet by the blast, scrambled up, her face a mask of disbelief. She raised her pistol to fire at the young campers. Percy looked at her. He held up his left hand. Bansho Tenon, an attractive force, just as absolute as the repulsive one, locked onto her. She was ripped from her feet, her pistol flying from her grasp, and pulled through the air toward him. She screamed, a sound of pure shock and terror, as she flew helplessly across the battlefield and slammed into his outstretched hand, which caught her effortlessly by the throat. He held her there, dangling a foot off the ground, her legs kicking uselessly. Her zealous fire had been replaced by stark terror. She was looking into his eyes. And she was seeing a god. What are you? She choked out. You attack my home. Percy's voice was unnaturally calm, a quiet deadliness that was more terrifying than any shout. You threaten my friends, my family. He looked past her, at her remaining soldiers, who were frozen in fear. This ends now. Leave, or be erased. One of the god killers, recovering his senses, fired a specialized rocket from a launcher. It streaked toward Percy, trailing green, magical fire. It was a Greek fire canister, designed to burn anything and everything. Percy didn't even flinch. He simply held up his free hand. As the rocket approached, it began to break apart, the green fire swirling around his palm, the metal casing crumbling, all of it flowing into him. He was absorbing it. He was absorbing the magic, the energy, the explosion itself. In a matter of seconds, it was gone, as if it had never existed. That broke them. The god killers, these disciplined, fearless soldiers, turned and ran. They abandoned their mission, their wounded, everything. They fled from the being that could bend the laws of physics and eat Greek fire for breakfast. Percy dropped the scarred woman to the ground. She collapsed in a heap, gasping for air. He didn't look at her. His gaze was fixed on the battlefield, on the faces of his friends. No one was cheering. No one was rushing to congratulate him. They were staring at him with the same look of terror the god killers had worn. He saw Will Solace instinctively shielding a younger camper. He saw Clarice, back on her feet, her expression not of anger or respect, but of pure, unadulterated awe and fear. He had not just won the battle. He had become the most terrifying thing on the field. He looked for Annabeth. She was standing where he'd last seen her, her dagger hanging loosely at her side. She was safe. The young campers were safe. But she wasn't looking at him with relief. She was looking at him like he was a puzzle she didn't know how to solve. A catastrophic event she was trying to comprehend. The power in his eyes receded, the world of chakra fading back to the familiar world of color. The sudden shift left him dizzy. A profound sense of exhaustion washing over him. The leash from Zeus felt like a lead weight, but it was nothing compared to the weight of 100 pairs of terrified eyes. Later, after the prisoners had been secured and the wounded tended to, he stood by the shore of the canoe lake, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of orange and purple he hadn't been able to see just an hour before. The camp was saved, but it no longer felt like home. He had defended it by showing its inhabitants that there was something among them far more powerful, and perhaps more dangerous, than any enemy that could attack from the outside. He heard footsteps on the dock behind him. It was Annabeth. She came to a stop a few feet away, the space between them feeling like a chasm. She was holding the manga. She looked from the book to him, her face pale in the twilight. "It's called the Rinnegan," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "The eyes of the Sage of Six Paths. In the story, it was said that the bearer is sent down from the heavens to become either a god of creation, who will calm the world's disorder, or a god of destruction, who will reduce everything to nothing." Percy said nothing. He just stared out at the water, at his father's domain. He was a son of Poseidon. He was a hero of Olympus. But as the first stars began to appear in the sky, reflected in the impossible, ripple-patterned eyes of a long-dead sage, he had never felt more alone. He had saved them, but he had become a god of destruction in their eyes. And he had no idea how to become a god of creation again. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. A Shadow from the Past. The silence was the worst part. Camp Half-Blood, a place that should have been thrumming with the chaotic symphony of sparring, forging, and laughter, was now muted. A low-grade, simmering tension had replaced the usual energy, and at the center of that tense quiet was Percy. He was a walking vacuum, sucking the sound and ease out of every room he entered. When he walked to the dining pavilion, conversations would stutter and die. When he approached the armory, other campers would suddenly find urgent business elsewhere. He was a hero, a savior, and a pariah, all at once. His power was a wall between him and everyone he had fought to protect. He didn't try to train with it anymore. The Rinnegan remained dormant, a sleeping god behind his eyelids. But its shadow lingered. He felt like a live grenade with a loose pin, and everyone was treating him accordingly. Annabeth was the exception, but even their dynamic had shifted. She was no longer just his girlfriend. She was his researcher, his analyst, his only interpreter for the impossible powers warring inside him. They spent their evenings on the beach, not with their arms around each other, but with the tattered Naruto manga open between them, a technical manual for his own soul. It says here that genjutsu, the Sharingan's illusionary techniques, can be used to affect the mind, to draw out information, or even to trap someone in a false reality, she explained, her brow furrowed in concentration. It's about manipulating the flow of chakra in the brain. But we don't even know if you have chakra. Feels like I've got something, Percy muttered, rubbing his temples. The memory of the absolute control he'd felt, the sensation of commanding the very forces of the universe, was a constant, seductive whisper in the back of his mind. And it feels dangerous. Grover, meanwhile, had practically vanished. He spent his days in the strawberry fields or deep in the woods, communing with the squirrels. He'd offer Percy a quick, nervous bleat of a greeting if they passed, but his eyes were always wide, always fixed on Percy's face as if expecting bones to burst from his skin at any moment. The rift with his oldest friend was a dull, constant ache in Percy's chest. The sickness began subtly. It started in the Demeter cabin. Katie Gardner, who could normally coax a bloom from a sun-baked rock, found her prized roses withering on the vine. She grew listless, her usual sunny disposition replaced by a quiet, cheerful melancholy. Then it spread to the Hermes cabin. The Stoll brothers, inseparable partners in crime since they'd arrived at camp, got into a screaming match over a missing pack of firecrackers, accusing each other of betrayal with a venom that was deeply unsettling. Travis ended the fight with a bloody nose and Connor with a look of genuine, hateful rage on his face. Soon, the poison was everywhere. Minor disagreements escalated into brawls. Old rivalries, like the one between the Ares and Apollo cabins, became bitter, hateful vendettas. Campers grew paranoid and withdrawn, their gazes suspicious, their words sharp and cruel. It was as if the emotional bedrock of the camp had been fractured, and all the ugliest parts of its inhabitants were seeping out through the cracks. Chiron tried to mediate, but his wisdom fell on deaf ears. The camp was tearing itself apart from the inside, and no one knew why. The Apollo medics could find no physical ailment, no magical curse they could identify. It was a plague of the soul. Percy, elated by the strange mental fortitude his dojutsu seemed to provide, watched it all with a growing sense of dread. The camp's fear of him was being eclipsed by its fear of itself. While the others were consumed by their inner turmoil, his own mind felt unnaturally clear. And because of that clarity, he started to see things. It was a faint, almost imperceptible shimmer in the air around the most afflicted campers. A thin, oily miasma of shadow, like heat haze from a road paved with solidified darkness. It clung to them, coiling around their heads and chests, and seemed to pulse faintly wean. Veer they lashed out in anger or sank into despair. No one else seemed to notice it. He found Annabeth in the big house, poring over ancient scrolls, her face etched with frustration. "It makes no sense," she said, not looking up. "There's no precedent for this. A mass hysteria, an emotional contagion. It's not the work of any monster I've ever read about." "It's a monster," Percy said quietly. She looked up, and he saw the dark circles under her eyes. The plague was affecting her, too. Her focus was frayed, her patience worn thin. "I can see it, Annabeth. A kind of shadow. It's feeding on them, on the anger, the fear. The stronger the emotion, the thicker the shadow gets." Annabeth stared at him, her analytical mind trying to process the data. "You can see it, with your eyes." "Not exactly. It's more like a perception. Like the Rinnegan could see chakra. This is an absence. A void clinging to people." He remembered the corrupted Dryad's words. Silence. Order. A gift. It's Erebus. It has to be. He's not attacking the camp's borders this time. He's attacking its heart. Their conversation was interrupted by a tremor that shook the entire big house. Dust rained down from the rafters. It wasn't an earthquake. It was a deep, resonant pulse of pure, negative energy that seemed to emanate from the direction of the cabins. They ran outside. The sky, a moment before a clear blue, was now being swallowed by an unnatural twilight. Shadows were stretching, deepening, twisting into grotesque shapes. Campers were screaming, but not in defiance. They were screaming in terror, owering in the face of their own amplified fears. And at the center of it, standing before the black, obsidian structure of the Hades cabin, was Nico D'Angelo. He wasn't just standing there, he was a vortex of despair. The shadowy miasma Percy had seen clinging to the others was a roaring, tangible storm of darkness around Nico. His face was pale and slick with tears, his dark eyes wide and lost in a private hell. He wasn't in control, he was a puppet, and his grief was the strings. "He's gone," Nico whispered, his voice cracking, yet it carried across the field with supernatural clarity. "She's gone, Bianca," and he let her go. His gaze, filled with years of repressed pain and anger, locked onto Percy. You promised you would protect her." The ground around Nico split open, and skeletal hands clawed their way out of the earth. The shadows beneath the trees coalesced, forming into solid, shifting shapes with glowing red eyes. The temperature dropped, and the air grew thick with the smell of grave dirt and regret. Nico was losing control of his powers on a catastrophic scale. Clarice, her face a mask of rage fueled by her own insecurities, charged him. "Get a grip, D'Angelo. You're not the only one with ghosts." Nico didn't even look at her. He just raised a hand, and a wall of solid shadow erupted from the ground, slamming into Clarice and sending her Ying back into the arms of her own terrified siblings. "He is the source," a new voice said. Percy turned. The god-killer leader, the woman with the scar, was being held between two large Hephaestus campers near the armory. Her name was Lyra. Chiron had been interrogating her for days. Her face was bruised, but her eyes were as sharp and zealous as ever. "That boy is a nexus of pain," Lyra called out, her voice cutting through the chaos. "A wound that will never heal. He is proof of what your gods do. They create children only to let them suffer. Our way is the only way to be free of it." Percy ignored her. He saw the truth. The creature, the gloom, had found the deepest well of pain in the camp and turned it into a weapon. Nico wasn't the enemy, he was the primary victim. "What do we do?" Annabeth yelled over the rising moan of spirits. "We can't fight him. We'll kill him." Percy looked at the terrified faces of his friends, at the camp descending into a nightmare of its own making, and at Nico. A boy drowning in his own heart. He could end this in a second. One pulse of the almighty push would scatter the skeletons, dispel the shadows, and leave Nico broken and unconscious on the ground. He could become the god of destruction and restore order through overwhelming force. And in doing so, he would become the monster they all feared he was. He would prove Lyra right. "No," he looked at Annabeth. "I have to go in," he said. "Go in where?" she asked, her voice tight with panic. "Into his head." Before she could argue, he walked forward, alone, into the maelstrom of shadow and bone. The skeletons turned toward him, their empty sockets glowing. The air grew so cold it burned his lungs. "Nico," he called out, "this isn't you. It's a trick. Something from Erebus is using you. He knows my pain." Nico screamed back, clutching his head. "He understands. You never did. You just moved on. You left her behind." The skeletons charged. Percy didn't draw Riptide. He closed his eyes and focused. He didn't reach for the Rinnegan's absolute power. He reached for the subtle, piercing clarity of the Sharingan. His eyelids flew open, revealing the blood-red irises, the three tomo spinning into a sharp, focused point. The world of the genjutsu opened to him. He didn't project an illusion outward. He turned it inward, shaping it into a bridge. He met Nico's gaze, and in that instant, he pushed his own consciousness forward, through the storm of grief, and into the mind of the son of Hades. He was standing in a graveyard under a perpetually starless, moonless sky. The tombstones bore only one name, Bianca D'Angelo. The air was filled with the sound of Nico's sobbing, echoing from all directions at once. In the center of the graveyard stood Nico, a small, 10-year-old boy in an aviator's jacket, staring at a fresh, open grave. And beside him, whispering in his ear, was a being of pure, shifting shadow, its form indistinct, its voice the sound of crushing despair. He let her die. He forgot his promise. He will leave you, too. They will all leave you, alone, always alone, the gloom hissed. Percy walked forward, his footsteps making no sound on the dead grass. "You're wrong," he said. The child Nico and the gloom both turned. The gloom's form solidified slightly, lashing out with a tendril of shadow. Percy simply walked through it. This was a battle of will, not of substance. "I never forgot," Percy said, his voice steady as he stopped in front of Nico. "I live with it every day. The friends I couldn't save. Bianca, Charles, Selena, so many others. It doesn't go away. Then you know." The child Nico cried, his face streaked with phantom tears. "You know how much it hurts." "I do," Percy said softly. "But that pain doesn't have to be a weapon, Nico. It doesn't have to be what destroys you. It can be what makes you stronger. It's proof that you loved. That you can love." He reached out, not to the boy, but to the open grave. From his own memory, he pulled forth an image, a genjutsu of his own making. A figure began to form inside the grave, not a corpse, but a shimmering, smiling spirit. Bianca D'Angelo. She looked just as Nico remembered her. Her green cap askew, her silver parka bright against the gloom. She looked at her brother, her expression one of profound love and sadness. "It wasn't his fault, Nico," her voice echoed, a memory given form. "It was my choice. You have to stop blaming him. You have to stop blaming yourself." The gloom shrieked, a sound of pure rage as its power was challenged not by force, but by acceptance. It lunged at the image of Bianca, but Percy stepped in its way, his Sharingan blazing. "You feed on pain that's left to fester in the dark," Percy said, his will a solid wall. You can't touch a pain that's brought into the light." He didn't fight the darkness. He shared his own. He let Nico see his own regrets, his own fears, the crushing weight of the prophecies he'd carried. He showed him the loneliness he felt, surrounded by people who feared him. He didn't offer a cure for the pain. He offered kinship in it. The child Nico looked from Bianca's spirit to Percy, and for the first time, his expression began to change. The raw agony was replaced by a flicker of understanding. He wasn't alone. In the real world, the campers watched in stunned silence as the storm around Nico began to falter. The skeletons crumbled to dust. The shadows receded. Nico's body was shaking, but the terrifying energy pouring from him had subsided. In the mindscape, the child Nico took a deep, shuddering breath and took a step away from the gloom. He looked at Percy, his eyes ancient and young at the same time. "She chose," he whispered. "Yeah," Percy said, "she did." The gloom let out one last, piercing shriek. Its hold was broken. The graveyard dissolved, and Percy was thrust back into his own mind with a jarring lurch. He was standing on the training ground, the eternal twilight receding as the sun broke through the clouds. Nico was on his knees, panting, the storm gone. A faint, shadowy form, no bigger than a man, was visible for a split second over Nico's head. Writhing in agony before it evaporated into nothingness, starved of its emotional food source. The silence that fell was different from the one before. It was not born of fear, but of sheer, unadulterated shock. Percy had faced down a force that had brought the entire camp to its knees, and he hadn't thrown a single punch. He had used his terrifying power to heal the deepest wound in their most troubled friend. Nico looked up at Percy, his eyes clear for the first time in days. The anger was gone, replaced by a deep, soul-weary exhaustion and something else, a fragile, reluctant gratitude. Percy offered him a hand. After a long moment, Nico took it, and Percy pulled him to his feet. He turned and saw Annabeth looking at him, a single, proud tear tracing a path through the grime on her cheek. He had done it. He had found another way. He wasn't a god of destruction. He was a protector. He was a healer. He was a friend. He had taken his first real step on a new and uncertain path. Chapter 6 End. Chapter A7. The Divine Gate. The healing of Nico D'Angelo sent a seismic shock through the camp, one that did more to restore order than any decree from Chiron ever could. The fear that had surrounded Percy didn't vanish, but it transmuted. It was no longer the fear of an unstable weapon, it was the awe-filled respect for a power that could be wielded with precision and compassion. He had faced the camp's collective demons and won not by breaking them, but by understanding them. The whispers didn't stop, but their tone changed from hushed anxiety to legendary reverence. The change was most profound in his friendships. Grover, who had witnessed the mental battle from the edge of the chaos, finally approached him, his face a mixture of apology and wonder. "I'm sorry, Percy," the satyr bleated, nervously shuffling his hooves. "What you did for Nico, that was Pan's work. That was healing the wild heart. I was scared of the power, but I didn't see you in it. I do now." The rift was mended, not with a grand gesture, but with a quiet, honest admission. Nico, for his part, was transformed. The brooding, ever-present storm cloud of his grief had finally broken. He was still quiet and reserved, a son of Hades to his core, but the crippling weight was gone. He began to train in the arena again, and he would often seek Percy out, not to talk, but just to be in the presence of the one person who had walked through his personal hell and had not judged him for the darkness he found there. It was a silent, powerful alliance. But Percy knew this was only a temporary victory. He had defeated one of Erebus's children, a creature of emotional manipulation, but the master was still out there. This was just a skirmish. The war was coming. It arrived not with a whisper, but with a scream that tore across the fabric of reality. It was a Tuesday. Percy and Annabeth were down at the armory, working with the Hephaestus cabin to analyze the god-killer's captured equipment. The technology was disturbingly advanced, celestial bronze integrated with complex circuitry in ways that should have been impossible. Beckendorf's younger brother, a stout kid named Leo with perpetually oil-stained hands and a wild glint in his eye, was chattering excitedly about arcanically resonant frequencies when the sky over Manhattan, visible from the highest point of Half-Blood Hill, turned the color of a day-old bruise. A low, gut-wrenching hum vibrated through the earth, a sound that felt less heard and more experienced, like a bass note played on the strings of the soul. All work in the camp ceased. Everyone, demigod and satyr and nymph, turned to look at the city. A pillar of absolute, light-devouring blackness had erupted in the heart of Midtown, near the Empire State Building. It was not smoke or shadow. It was a wound in the world, a vertical tear in the sky that seemed to lead into a realm of pure, unadulterated nothing. The air around it warped and distorted, and the tops of skyscrapers near its edge seemed to bend inward as if being pulled by an unimaginable gravitational force. "He's not using an agent this time," Annabeth said, her voice tight with a dreadful finality. "He's coming himself." Chiron galloped out of the big house, a grim expression on his face. Argus was already loading campers into the vans. "This is it. Get your armor. Get your weapons. We are all that stands between that thing and the mortal world." The ride into the city was a descent into a nightmare. The mortal world was in a state of mass panic. Sirens blared, cars were abandoned in the streets, and people ran in every direction, their faces blank with a terror they couldn't comprehend. Their minds were trying to rationalize the impossible sight in the sky, a freak weather event. A terrorist attack, a mass hallucination. But the demigods saw it for what it was, a gateway. A door being kicked open between worlds. As they got closer, the effect intensified. The hum was a physical pressure now, making their teeth ache and their vision swim. A wave of profound despair washed over them, a feeling of utter hopelessness that made drawing a sword feel like a pointless, childish gesture. "Don't give in," Percy yelled, his voice a clarion call against the crushing gloom. He could feel the gate's influence trying to seep into his mind, trying to find the cracks of doubt and fear. But after his journey into Nico's soul, his own mental defenses were like steel. It's a weapon, just like the gloom was. It feeds on despair. Fight it. They set up a command post in Bryant Park, a few blocks from the epicenter. The sight was even worse up close. The gate was a shimmering, vertical oval of blackness, 1,000 feet high, pulsing with a slow, sickening rhythm. The area around it was decaying. The concrete of the street was crumbling into gray dust. The glass of office buildings was turning opaque and brittle. Life, energy, and even the laws of physics were being unmade. And from the gate, things were beginning to emerge. They were not an army, but manifestations of Erebus's will. Formless, shifting creatures of shadow and silence, they flowed out of the portal. Their touch aging everything it came into contact with. A car they swarmed over rusted and crumbled into dust in seconds. A pigeon that flew too close had its feathers turned to ash before its body disintegrated. "We can't fight those things," Clarice said, her usual bluster gone, replaced by a grim pragmatism. "They're not solid." "Then we don't fight the symptoms," Annabeth declared, unrolling a schematic of the city. "We fight the disease. We have to close that gate." Just then, a flash of golden light illuminated the darkened sky. A chariot, pulled by 2 Pegasi, descended from the clouds. In it were Apollo and Artemis. It was a shocking sight. The gods rarely intervened so directly, especially not together. "Father's hands are tied," Apollo called down, his sunny disposition replaced by a frantic urgency. Direct intervention on this scale, it would be like setting off a nuclear bomb to kill a spider. The collateral damage would level the city. "We can weaken it from the outside. But it's up to you to close it from the ground." Artemis, her silver eyes glowing with a cold fire, notched an arrow to her bow. "We will buy you time. Go." She and Apollo shot into the sky, their divine power erupting in brilliant flashes of sun gold and moon silver light that beat back the encroaching darkness, containing the decay to a few city blocks. It was a holding action. And from the strain on their faces, it was clear they couldn't maintain it forever. The demigods charged. Percy was at the forefront, his mind racing. How do you close a door to a dimension of pure nothingness? You couldn't just stab it. You couldn't blow it up. He activated his Sharingan, and then pushed beyond it, into the all-seeing perception of the Byakugan. He looked at the gate, and he saw it not as a whole, but as a structure. It was an immensely complex, multi-dimensional piece of engineering. Tethers of dark energy, invisible to the naked eye, were anchored into the very bedrock of Manhattan, drawing power from the ley lines of the earth itself. It was a siphon, draining the life of the world to sustain its own existence. It has anchors. He yelled to Annabeth over the din of battle. Underground. We have to sever them. Annabeth's eyes lit up with understanding. The subway tunnels. And the water mains. It's using the city's own grid as a conductor. She began barking orders, dividing their forces into teams, sending them to the weak points Percy had identified. Percy, meanwhile, had to deal with the creatures pouring from the gate. He couldn't touch them, but he didn't have to. He slammed his hands together, the motion instinctual, the hand signs flowing from a memory that wasn't his own. He channeled his own life energy, his will to protect, into a new form. Wood style. Deep forest emergence. The ground at his feet split open. But it was not the dead, skeletal earth of Nico's power. It was an explosion of vibrant, unstoppable life. Massive trees, bigger than any redwood. Their bark a rich, healthy brown and their leaves a defiant, brilliant green, erupted from the concrete. They grew with impossible speed, their branches weaving together to form a thick, living wall between the demigods and the shadow creatures. The creatures of silence slammed into the wall of life and recoiled as if burned. The raw, chaotic vitality of Percy's creation was poison to their ordered nothingness. The demigods, stunned for a moment, let out a ragged cheer. Percy had given them a barricade, a fighting chance. But it was taking a toll. Percy could feel the energy draining from him. A massive, continuous expenditure. This wasn't a trick, it was an act of pure, large-scale creation. Annabeth ran to his side, her hand on his arm. Percy, you can't keep this up forever. Don't have to, he grunted, the sweat beading on his forehead. Just long enough for you to work your magic. He could see the other teams moving into position through the translucent world of the Byakugan. He saw Nico and a squad of Hades campers melt into the shadows of a subway entrance. He saw Clarice leading the Ares kids into a maintenance tunnel for the city's water system. They were close. The gate seemed to sense the threat. The blackness pulsed violently, and a new creature emerged. It was different from the others. It had a form, a vaguely humanoid shape made of solidified shadow. And it carried a long scythe that seemed to cut not the air, but the light itself. It was one of Erebus's lieutenants. A reaper. The reaper ignored the barricade. It simply floated through the living wood, the trees withering and dying in its wake. It was heading straight for Percy. Percy met its charge, riptide in hand. When his bronze blade met the reaper's shadowy scythe, there was no clang of metal on metal. There was a dead, flat thump, and a wave of pure entropy washed over him. He felt his energy drain, his strength falter. The reaper didn't fight with force, it fought with decay. He had to end it quickly. He couldn't afford a prolonged battle. He needed something absolute. He deactivated the Byakugan and poured all his focus into his left eye, the eye of the Rinnegan. He saw the Reaper not as a solid thing, but as a construct of energy, a soul bound in shadow. He could not destroy it, but he could seal it. He drove the Reaper back with a ferocious flurry of strikes. Creating a moment's space, he slammed his palm onto the ground. Planetary devastation. The earth beneath the Reaper shattered. Chunks of concrete, asphalt, and dirt were ripped from the ground and began flying toward the shadowy creature, pulled by a new, intense gravitational core that Percy had just created in its center. The Reaper was trapped, its form being bat-ered and compressed as more and more debris was added to the forming sphere. Within seconds, it was a massive, floating globe of rock and rubble, a miniature moon hanging over the streets of Manhattan, with the Reaper sealed. Screaming silently, in its core, Percy fell to one knee, panting, the cost of the technique staggering. He had bought them the time they needed. A moment later, he felt it. The tethers of the gate, deep underground, were severed in a flash of Stygian iron and celestial bronze. The gate flickered. Its connection to the world was broken. But it was still there, a dying wound. Still spewing out the last of its shadowy minions. It needed a final push. A seal. Annabeth was at his side again, her face grim. It's unstable, Percy. When it collapses, the backlash of energy could wipe out a 10-block radius. Percy looked at the pulsating gate, then at his friends, fighting bravely against the dying shadows. He looked up and saw the flashes of gold and silver from Apollo and Artemis, holding back the sky. He knew what he had to do. He walked toward the gate, toward the wall of living trees he had created. Fall back, he commanded, his voice imbued with a power that none dared disobey. Everyone, get clear, now. He placed his hands on the trunk of the largest tree in his wooden wall. He didn't just command it, he merged with it. He poured the last of his energy, his will, his very essence into the wood. Sage art would release. True several thousand hands. The forest didn't just grow. It transformed. The trees flowed together, weaving and compacting into a single, titanic form. A wooden golem, easily the size of a skyscraper, rose from the streets of New York. It was a seated figure, vaguely reminiscent of statues of the Buddha, but behind it, 1,000 massive wooden arms fanned out like a peacock's tail. The demigods, who had retreated to a safe distance, could only stare in open-mouthed, terrified wonder. Even the gods above paused their assault to witness the spectacle. Percy was at the heart of the colossus, in its head, his consciousness directing its every move. He felt the power, ancient and immense, flowing through him. He was life itself, pushing back against the encroaching void. He made the golem raise its 1,000 arms. And then, he brought them down. It was not a punch. It was a judgment. 1,000 massive, wooden fists rained down on the dying gate. A relentless, percussive barrage of pure life energy. Each impact was not just a physical blow, but a conceptual one, forcing the idea of life and creation into a wound of death and nothingness. The gate screamed, a sound that tore at the minds of everyone who heard it. And then, with a final, implosive flash of purple-black light, it collapsed in on itself and vanished, leaving behind nothing but an eerie silence and a street filled with a forest that shouldn't exist. The giant wooden statue began to crumble, its purpose served, its energy expended. It dissolved into a shower of leaves and wood chips, until only Percy was left, standing where its heart had been. He fell to his knees, utterly and completely drained, the world spinning around him. The crisis was over. The sky returned to its normal color. The oppressive hum was gone. He had done it. He hadn't just closed the door. He had shown Erebus that this world, in all its chaotic, noisy, vibrant glory, would not be silenced. He had become a god of creation. And he had changed the face of New York City forever. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The Sage's Legacy. The city called him a hero. The media, in their frantic attempts to explain the impossible, settled on a narrative of a localized, bizarre seismic event coupled with a freak atmospheric phenomenon. The sudden, inexplicable appearance of a mature, skyscraper-sized forest in the middle of Midtown Manhattan was attributed to some kind of radical eco-terrorist group with access to unbelievably advanced horticultural technology. Percy Jackson, the brave teenager, who had been photographed helping civilians evacuate, became a local icon for a week. Olympus was not so easily placated. The summons this time was not a lightning bolt, it was a quiet, suffocating pressure. 2 days after the Battle of the Gate, Percy was helping the Demeter and Hephaestus cabins figure out how to safely dismantle the 1,000-foot-tall wooden golem he'd left in the financial district when the air around him grew thin and heavy, the light bending as if through old glass. Apollo and Artemis appeared before him, their divine forms subdued, the faces etched with a gravity that transcended their sibling rivalry. "The council is in permanent session," Artemis said, her silver eyes holding no warmth. "They have been debating your fate since the gate collapsed. It's not a good scene, Percy," Apollo added, his usual radiating confidence replaced by a nervous energy. "A lot of talk about uncontainable power and preemptive measures. Dad's more paranoid than ever. That little stunt with the giant wood puppet. You saved the city, but you terrified the cosmos. They didn't take him to the throne room. They escorted him to a smaller antechamber, a stark, white marble room with no windows and a single, imposing bronze door. His father was waiting for him." Poseidon looked ancient. The weight of millennia seemed to be pressing down on his shoulders. He was not in his usual Bermudas and Hawaiian shirt, but in full battle regalia, his sea-green armor shimmering, his trident held loosely in his hand. "They are afraid, my son," Poseidon said, his voice the low, mournful sound of a tide pulling away from the shore. "What you did, what you are, it is outside of their understanding. And the gods destroy what they do not understand. So I'm a prisoner?" Percy asked, the words tasting like ash. "You are a political crisis," Poseidon corrected grimly. "Zeus wants to make an example of you. He wants to bind you in the deepest parts of Tartarus. A place where your power can be neutralized. Athena, surprisingly, argues for study. She wants to dissect your abilities, to learn their source. Ares wants to point you at our enemies. Hera, she simply wants you gone. And you? Percy asked, his voice quiet. Poseidon's sea-green eyes, so like his own, met his. I am trying to keep you alive. But I am one voice against 11. I am using all of my influence. Calling in every favor owed to me over the last 3 millennia, just to keep them in that room, talking. But it is a temporary measure. Eventually, they will come to a decision. And I fear it will not be in your favor. The leash was no longer a threat, it was a tightening noose. Percy could feel the walls closing in. He had saved the world, and his reward was a choice between a cage and a dissection table. So I run, Percy stated. It wasn't a question. There is nowhere you can run where they cannot find you, his father said, a deep sadness in his voice. You cannot outrun the sky. Maybe not, Percy said, a desperate, defiant idea beginning to form in his mind. But maybe I can go somewhere he won't think to look. He looked at his father, his resolve hardening. I can't keep reacting to this. I can't keep fighting blind. I have to know what I am. Where this power came from. There has to be an answer. Poseidon studied his son, seeing not a frightened boy, but a young man preparing for his own odyssey. He gave a slow, solemn nod. Knowledge is a dangerous current to swim in, Percy. But it is the only one that may carry you to a safe harbor now. He placed a heavy hand on Percy's shoulder. I cannot help you on this quest. To do so would be an act of open defiance, and it would start a war we cannot win. You will be on your own. I'm never on my own, Percy said, and the image of Annabeth's unwavering gray eyes flashed in his mind. He returned to camp under a shroud of secrecy. He told only Annabeth, Grover, and Nico what had transpired. Grover offered to come, to guide them through the wild places of the earth, but Percy refused. This was not a journey for the wild. This was a journey for the dead. The underworld, Nico asked, his dark eyes wide as they sat around the war table in the big house. Why would you want to go back there? The answers you want aren't in my father's court. We're not going to see your father, Annabeth explained, tapping a point on a hand-drawn map of the underworld she had somehow procured. The Olympians, their knowledge is vast, but it's curated. They tell the stories that suit them. The Titans, the same. We need a source that's older. Something that exists outside their political structures. A primordial source. There are beings in the deep realms, Nico admitted, his voice dropping to a whisper. Places even my father avoids. Beings of memory and shadow, who were old when Kronos was young. But they don't speak to the living. They don't speak to anyone. They'll speak to me, Percy said, his confidence not born of arrogance, but of a desperate, bone-deep certainty. I'm not just a demigod anymore, Nico. I'm something else. Whatever I am, it's old. It feels old. Maybe they'll recognize it. Nico hesitated, the shadows in the corner of the room seeming to deepen around him. The thought of returning to his father's realm, of willingly plunging back into the gloom he had just escaped, was a heavy weight. But he looked at Percy, at the hero who had waded into his personal hell to pull him out, and he knew he had no choice. It was a debt, an oath of fealty sworn not to a king, but to a friend. Fine, he sighed, the word tasting of resignation. But we don't use the doors. We don't walk the paths of the living. I'll take you my way. It's faster. And darker. 3 hours later, under the light of a half-moon, the three of them stood in the shadow of the camp's largest pine tree. Hold on, Nico instructed. And try not to scream. It echoes. He took their hands, and the world dissolved. It was not the violent, ozone-scented teleportation of Hermes. This was a cold, silent plunge. It felt like stepping off a cliff into an ocean of freezing oil. There was no sense of movement, only a profound and terrifying feeling of unbeing. Percy's senses, even his enhanced ones, were useless. There was nothing to see, nothing to hear, only the crushing, absolute presence of darkness. When reality reasserted itself, it did so with a nauseating lurch. They were standing on a barren plain of black, glassy rock under a ceiling of impenetrable darkness. There were no stars, no moon. The only light came from the faint, ghostly shimmer of the river Styx, miles away, a ribbon of misery cutting through the landscape. The air was cold, still, and smelled of dust and forgotten time. "Where are we?" Annabeth whispered, her hand instinctively going to the hilt of her dagger. "The Asphodel Meadows are that way," Nico said, pointing into the gloom. "Elysium, and the Isles of the Blessed are beyond them. We're going the other way." He gestured toward a range of jagged, tooth-like mountains in the distance, a place that radiated a silence so profound it felt like a physical presence. "We're going to the edges. The Forgotten Lands." Their journey was a silent trek through a dead world. They walked for what felt like days, time having no meaning in this stagnant place. They passed shades, but these were not the chattering, confused spirits of the recently dead. These were ancient, worn smooth souls who had long ago forgotten their names, their lives, their very humanity. They were little more than wisps of gray smoke, huddled in the cracks of the rocks, their eternal apathy a tangible force. Nico was their guide, his connection to this realm allowing him to navigate the unseen paths. He led them through a narrow canyon whose walls seemed to absorb the faint light, the darkness within so complete it felt solid. "There are things in here," he whispered, his hand on the hilt of his Stygian iron sword. "Things that were chained by my father before the Olympians even came to power. Don't speak. Don't draw attention." Percy could feel them. He activated his Byakugan, and the world bloomed into its ghostly, silver and gray form. He could see them then, massive, writhing shapes of pure negative energy chained to the canyon walls with shackles of what looked like solidified light. They were primordial horrors, failed creations from the dawn of time, and their silent, eternal rage was a poison in the air. They emerged from the canyon into a place that defied all logic. It was a vast, cavernous space, but the ceiling was a swirling vortex of silver mist, and the floor was a calm, shoreless lake of liquid night. In the center of the lake was a single, small island, upon which grew a single, gnarled, ancient willow tree whose leaves were the color of tarnished silver. "This is it," Nico breathed, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and terror. "The Grove of Kairos." "Kairos," Annabeth whispered, "the primordial god of opportunity. I thought he was just a minor spirit." "He is more," Nico said. "He is not a god of a single opportune moment. He is the keeper of all moments that could have been. The custodian of crossroads and lost possibilities. This is where realities intersect. It's a dangerous place for a soul. You can get lost in your own what-ifs." A small, flat-bottomed skiff made of dark, polished wood was waiting at the edge of the lake. There was no ferryman. Nico pushed it into the water, and it began to move on its own, gliding silently toward the island. As they approached, Percy felt a strange sensation. It was as if he were splitting, fracturing into 1,000 different versions of himself. He saw flashes, echoes of other lives. Percy the contented marine biologist, Percy the king of a glittering Atlantean city, Percy the vengeful spirit who had drowned the world after losing his mother. He saw 1,000 paths not taken, each one pulling at him, tempting him. He felt a hand on his arm. Annabeth. Her face was pale, but her eyes were focused, her will an anchor in the swirling sea of possibility. "Don't look," she said, her voice firm. "Focus on the now, on us." He held her gaze, and the phantom lives receded, the pull lessening. He was Percy Jackson, son of Poseidon, and his path was this one. They stepped onto the island. The air beneath the silver willow was calm and warm, a stark contrast to the cold of the rest of the underworld. Sitting at the base of the tree, his back against the ancient trunk, was a being who looked both impossibly young and ancient beyond measure. He appeared as a young man with eyes that were not a single color, but a swirling, kaleidoscopic nebula of all colors. He wore a simple gray tunic, and he was idly tossing a small, glowing orb of light from one hand to the other. He looked up as they approached, and his multicolored eyes fixed on Percy with an unnerving, all-seeing intensity. He smiled, a gesture that seemed to contain both immense sadness and profound amusement. "The anomaly," Kairos said, his voice a chorus of a million different tones, a harmony of whispers. "The soul graft. I have been watching your ripples in the pond of reality. I was wondering when you would seek the source of the stone." "You know what I am?" Percy asked, his voice hoarse. "I do not know what you are," Kairos corrected gently. "I only know what you are made of. You are a convergence, a fluke of cosmic proportions, a one in an infinity chance that the universe, in its endless poetry, allowed to happen. He gestured for them to sit. Your reality is but one leaf on an infinite tree. There are other leaves, other worlds. In one such world, Power is not a matter of blood or divinity, but of spiritual energy. Chakra. That world had its own heroes, its own saviors. Its ultimate champion was a being known as the Sage of Six Paths, a soul so powerful that it could not truly die, but was instead reincarnated, time and again, to guide the world toward peace. He tossed the glowing orb, and it hovered in the air between them, images swirling within it. Percy saw a blonde-haired boy in orange, a dark-haired rival, epic battles that shaped mountains and parted seas. He saw the Rinnegan, the Sharingan, all of it. But all cycles end, Kairos continued, his voice growing somber. In their final incarnation, the sage's inheritors achieved a true, lasting peace. Their purpose was fulfilled. The great spiritual energy of the sage was, for the first time since its creation, untethered. It could not stay in a world that no longer needed it. It drifted, a current in the cosmic sea between the leaves of the great tree, seeking an anchor. His kaleidoscopic eyes focused entirely on Percy. And it found you, a soul of immense strength and potential. A demigod, already a bridge between two worlds. A hero with a will so unbreakably tied to the protection of others that it mirrored the sage's own. The graph took the sage's legacy, his power, his eons of battle experience, all of it merged with the soul of the son of Poseidon. It all crashed down on Percy at once. It wasn't a curse. It wasn't a fluke of biology. He was a vessel, a continuation. He was the inheritor of a legacy a universe away. He was two heroes in one. Why? Percy asked, the single word encompassing 1,000 questions. Why does a tide choose to come in? Kairos countered. Why does a star choose to be born? It is the nature of great power to seek purpose. Your world is on the cusp of a great, terrible change. It needed a new kind of hero. Erebus, Annabeth breathed. Kairos's smile faded completely. The Lord of Silence. The Prince of Stasis. He is older than your gods. And his ambition spans all realities. He has seen a million worlds rise and fall. He sees the chaos of life, the pain of free will, the endless cycle of war and peace, and he deems it a flaw. A bug in the system of creation. The orb of light flickered, the images of heroes replaced by a vision of a universe of perfect, crystalline stillness. Galaxies hung in silent, motionless perfection. No life, no thought, no change, only a cold, beautiful, eternal order. He does not seek to destroy the universe, Kairos said, his voice a low, warning hum. He seeks to perfect it, to put it under glass. And in you, he sees the ultimate tool. The power of the Sage of Six Paths is the power to create and destroy worlds. The power to enforce a single will upon all of reality. He knows what you are, Perseus Jackson. He does not want to kill you. He wants to corrupt you. To break your will, to fill you with such despair that you will willingly become his god of destruction, the final arbiter of his silent, perfect universe. The weight of that revelation was heavier than the sky. This wasn't about saving a camp or a city. It wasn't even about saving his own world. Erebus was playing an endgame for all of creation, and Percy was the key piece on the board. How do I fight him? Percy asked, his voice tight. How does a river fight a mountain? Kairos replied, it does not break it with a single blow. It flows around it. It wears it down, grain by grain. He will attack your heart, your hope, the bonds you share with others. That is the battlefield, your will against his, the chaos of love against the order of silence. He stood, and the skiff returned to the shore of the island. That is all I can offer. The knowledge of what you are. The rest of the story is yours to write. They took the silent boat ride back, the sea of possibilities seeming less tempting now, the path ahead terrifyingly clear. They navigated the canyon of horrors and walked the plains of the forgotten dead. The words of the primordial being echoing in their minds. Nico guided them back into the shadows, and they emerged, blinking, into the familiar moonlight of Camp Half-Blood. They were back, but they were not the same people who had left. Annabeth looked at him, her eyes seeing not just the boy she loved, but the impossible, cosmic weight he now carried. Nico looked at him with a new understanding, seeing not just a powerful demigod, but a kindred spirit who was also a fusion of two worlds. And Percy Percy looked at his hands, the hands that could create forests and shatter mountains. He was no longer just Percy Jackson, son of Poseidon. He was the legacy of the sage, the final hope of a chaotic, beautiful, imperfect universe. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his very soul, that his war with the darkness had only just begun. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. War of the Pantheons. The knowledge Kairos had given them was a suffocating blanket. It recontextualized everything. Every fight, every choice, every near miss was no longer just part of a demigod's dangerous life. It was a move in a cosmic chess match for the soul of all creation. Percy felt the weight of it in his bones. A weariness that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. He was the sage's legacy. He was Erebus's ultimate prize. He was a walking, talking endgame. They told Chiron everything. They sat in the big house, the four of them, Percy, Annabeth, Nico, and Grover, and laid out the impossible truth. The old centaur listened, his ancient, wise eyes never leaving Percy's face. He stroked his beard, the silence in the room thick with the scent of old books and celestial bronze polish. When they had finished, he didn't express shock or disbelief. He simply let out a long, heavy sigh. "I have taught heroes for 3,000 years, he said, his voice raspy with emotion. I have seen them rise and fall. I have seen them fight monsters and titans and giants. But, this is a burden no hero should have to carry." He looked at Percy, a flicker of the old mentor's warmth in his eyes. "But you are not just a hero, are you, Percy? You are something more." The IR Council of War was interrupted by a sound that did not belong at Camp Half-Blood. It was the clear, resonant chime of a bell, a single, perfect note that cut through the afternoon air and seemed to hang there, vibrating with an arcane power that made the hairs on Percy's arms stand up. Everyone in the camp froze. Then, at the crest of Half-Blood Hill, just beside Talia's pine, two figures shimmered into existence. They were not Greek. One was a young man with dark, intense eyes and brown, unruly hair, wearing linen robes over modern jeans and a t-shirt. He held a curved ivory wand in one hand and a shepherd's crook in the other. The other was a young woman with caramel-streaked hair, her eyes a kaleidoscope of colors, wearing combat boots and carrying a leather satchel that seemed to hum with contained energy. They stood there, not as invaders, but as emissaries, radiating an aura of ancient, sand-worn magic. Egyptian magicians, Annabeth breathed, her hand flying to her dagger. House of Life. Before Chiron could even move, another presence announced itself. A Bifrost bridge, a shimmering, rainbow-colored torrent of light, slammed down into the center of the volleyball court with a thunderous roar. From it stepped a woman clad in gleaming silver armor, a winged helmet on her head and a spear in her hand. Her face was stern and beautiful, her eyes held the cold fire of a winter star. A Valkyrie. Behind her, a dozen warriors, men and women of all shapes and sizes, hefted axes and swords, their bodies covered in the runes of the north. They were Einherjar, the chosen warriors of Odin. And they looked ready for a glorious battle. The camp was a tinderbox, and two different matches had just been thrown into it. "Perseus Jackson," the Valkyrie's voice boomed, clear and cold as a fjord. "By order of the All-Father, you are to come with us to Asgard. Your unchecked power threatens the balance of the 9 worlds. You will be contained. It is not a request." The male magician on the hill raised his crook, and a glowing golden hieroglyph, an ankh, shimmered in the air above him. "The duat is in turmoil, demigod. Your little light show in Manhattan has woken things that were meant to sleep. The House of Life has issued a judgment. You will be brought to the first gnome to be assessed and, if necessary, neutralized." Percy stood between the two factions, the entire camp a frozen tableau behind him. He could feel their power. The Egyptians' magic was complex, a woven tapestry of words and symbols. The Norse warriors was raw, chaotic, a promise of glorious violence. They didn't see a hero. They saw a problem, a potential Ragnarok, a weapon of Isophet. "He's not going anywhere," Clarice snarled, stomping forward, her spear in hand, the entire Ares cabin mobilizing behind her. That was all it took. The Valkyrie smiled, a terrifyingly eager expression. "Very well, a battle to test your mettle. Valhalla." With a unified roar, the Einherjar charged. The Egyptians were more subtle. The magician, Percy thought he heard the woman call him Carter, slammed his crook into the ground. Ha-di, he commanded. A wall of shimmering, hieroglyphic energy erupted from the earth, separating the Norse warriors from the main body of the camp, funneling them toward the Ares cabin. It was a classic divide-and-conquer strategy. At the same time, the woman, Sadie, began chanting in a low, rapid voice, throwing a handful of powder into the air which exploded into a flock of glowing, energy-sapping birds that swarmed the Apollo archers. The war had begun. It was chaos, a multi-front battle the likes of which the camp had never seen. The Ares cabin met the Einherjar in a joyous, brutal clash of shields and axes, a fight of pure, glorious strength. The Apollo and Hermes cabins were bogged down by the Egyptians, spellcraft, their arrows turning to sand in midair, their movements slowed by binding spells. Percy knew he was the target. He saw Carter, the male magician, pointing his wand at him. Tush! A rope of pure golden light shot from the wand, attempting to ensnare him. Percy didn't dodge. He activated his Rinnegan, held up a hand, and simply absorbed the spell. The golden rope dissolved into nothing as it touched his palm. Carter's eyes widened in shock. This was not a power he had ever encountered. He consumes magic, Sadie yelled to her brother, just as she transformed her own staff into a giant, slithering cobra. Percy couldn't be everywhere at once. While he focused on the magicians, two of the Einherjar broke from the main fray, their eyes wild, and charged him. He met them with Riptide, his Sharingan blazing to life. The world slowed. He saw the arc of their axe swings, the feint of their sword thrusts. He moved between them like water, a blur of bronze. His blade deflecting, parrying, disarming them with a fluid efficiency that left them staring at their empty hands in disbelief. He was winning his personal battles, but the camp was losing the war. The combined assault was too much, too varied. The Egyptians' magic was neutralizing their ranged support while the Norse warriors' raw power was overwhelming their front line. Campers were falling, injured and exhausted. Then the third faction made its move. From the woods, a volley of suppressed, high-velocity rounds tore through the air. They weren't aimed at the Egyptians or the Norse. They were aimed at the Athena cabin, at Annabeth, who was trying to direct the camp's chaotic defense. The god killers, Lyra, the scarred woman Percy had captured, was at their head. They had used the chaos as cover to infiltrate the camp's borders. She held a sniper rifle, its scope glinting, a cold, pragmatic fury in her eyes. Cut off the head of the snake, she commanded her soldiers. Nico moved like a wraith, shadow traveling across the battlefield to intercept the bullets with a wall of Stygian iron, but it was a desperate, last-ditch defense. They were being attacked on three fronts, by three completely different ideologies of warfare. Percy saw it all, the entire battlefield laid out in his mind, a tapestry of failure. They were going to lose. His friends were going to die. Not because they weren't strong, but because their enemies were not united. They were a disorganized collection of rivals, and his home was the battlefield they had chosen to tear apart. The battlefield is your will against his, Kyrus had said. The chaos of love against the order of silence. He needed to create order. Not the silent, dead order of Erebus. He needed to create his own. He leapt to the highest point he could find, the roof of the big house, and slammed his hands together. He poured every ounce of will he possessed not into an attack, but into a declaration. Wood-style, world-spanning wall. The earth of Camp Half-Blood screamed as it tore itself apart. Four immense, perfectly smooth walls of interwoven wood, each 100 feet high, erupted from the ground. They didn't attack anyone. They simply rose, an instantaneous, four-sided fortress that physically separated the warring factions. The Norse were trapped in a wooden box with the Ares cabin. The Egyptians found themselves cut off from the main camp, alone in the strawberry fields. The god killers were isolated near the woods, their line of sight to Annabeth completely gone. A stunned, ringing silence fell, broken only by the furious pounding of an Einherjar's axe against the impossibly dense wood. Percy stood atop the wall, looking down at the leaders of the three factions. His eyes were blazing with the ripple-patterned Rinnegan, his voice amplified by the strange, resonant power that now flowed through him. Enough, he commanded, and the word was not a plea, but a judgment. He looked at the Valkyrie. You seek a glorious battle. You seek to contain a threat. The true threat isn't me. It's a primordial god of nothingness that wants to erase your 9 worlds and turn Valhalla into a silent tomb. Is that a glorious end? He turned his gaze to the magicians. You feel the duat in turmoil. You want to restore balance. Erebus is a god of absolute order, a perversion of Ma that would render your entire cosmology meaningless. He is the ultimate victory of Isophet, a chaos that ends all chaos by ending everything. Finally, he looked toward the woods, his voice piercing the trees where Lyra and her soldiers hid. And you call yourselves god killers. You hate the gods for their petty wars, their cruelty, their meddling. And you are right too. But you are aiming at the symptoms. There is a disease, a shadow that fathered the very concept of divine, tyrannical control. His name is Erebus. He wants to put the entire universe in a cage. You want to free the world. Then help me fight the warden. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the sheer force of his will holding the massive construct together. You can all keep fighting each other. You can tear this place apart, and tear each other apart. And when you are finished, Erebus will come for the ashes. Or, you can stop. You can listen, and we can fight the war that actually matters. Together. Silence. The Einherjar stopped pounding on the wall. Carter and Sadie stared up at him, their expressions a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. From the woods, a single figure stepped out, holding her hands up to show she was unarmed. It was Lyra. Her face was a mask of conflicting emotions. Everything in her life, her entire ideology, was built on the destruction of beings like Percy. But his woe, RDS, they were not the words of a tyrant. They were the words of a revolutionary. And they were logical. You're asking us to trust a being with the power to level a city. She called out, her voice laced with a lifetime of earned cynicism. I'm not asking you to trust me, Percy replied, his voice softening slightly. I'm asking you to trust your own eyes. Look at what your disunity is causing. This is what Erebus wants. This is chaos, and he is the only one who profits from it. Lyra stared at him for a long, hard moment. She looked at the Norse warriors, spoiling for a fight. She looked at the Egyptian magicians, meddling with powers they barely understood. She saw the same divine arrogance she had sworn to destroy. And she saw Percy, the one being powerful enough to end them all, offering a truce instead. He was not acting like a god. He was acting like a soldier. A leader. The Lord of Silence is the ultimate tyrant, she said, more to herself than to anyone else. Then she looked up, her eyes hard. Her decision made. We will fight the warden. We will not be your friends. We will not be your allies. We will be a weapon aimed at a common enemy. When that enemy is gone, our truce is over. It was the first crack in the wall of hate. Carter looked at his sister, who gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Our purpose is to maintain balance, he called up to Percy. Is Erebus. He is a threat to that balance. We will withdraw and confer with the chief lector. But we will listen. The Valkyrie was the last to relent. She looked at the unbroken wall, at the quiet sea, confidence of the demigod standing upon it, and she saw a power greater than any she had witnessed in battle. This was not a foe to be beaten, this was a force to be reckoned with. The All-Father will hear of this, was all she said. A grudging respect in her tone. Percy held their gazes for a moment longer, then he released his power. The massive wooden walls crumbled, not into splinters, but to a shower of vibrant green leaves that rained down on the battered battlefield, a strange, beautiful benediction. He leapt down from the roof of the big house, the Rinnegan fading from his eyes, leaving him feeling drained and hollow. The Norse warriors began their retreat back to the Bifrost. The Egyptians shimmered and vanished from the hill. The god killers, led by Lyra, walked slowly, cautiously, into the open. Their weapons lowered but not stowed. The battle was over. The camp was in ruins, but it still stood. Annabeth rushed to his side, her hand finding his, her presence a warm, lit anchor in the swirling vortex of his new reality. He had faced down 3 different armies, each a world unto itself. He hadn't beaten them. He had recruited them. The board was larger than he could have ever imagined, and he had just impossibly started to unite the pieces. But as he looked at the wary, hostile faces of his new associates, he knew that holding this fragile, volatile alien CE together would be a greater battle than any he had ever fought before. Chapter 9 End. Chapter 10. The God of a New World. The truce was a cold and fragile thing. For a week, Camp Half-Blood became a tense, multinational military base. The God-killers under Lyra set up a sterile, efficient encampment by the woods, their discipline a stark contrast to the demigods' chaotic energy. They shared intelligence on Erebus's movements, cults forming in major cities, strange dead zones appearing across the globe where all life and energy simply ceased, but they did not share meals. They were allies of convenience. Their hatred of the divine a constant, simmering presence. The Norse, after a heated cosmic debate relayed via a series of increasingly frantic spectral ravens, agreed to lend a contingent of Einherjar. They treated the whole affair as a grand shore leave before the final battle, their boisterous songs and honor-bound duels clashing with the somber mood. The Egyptians sent Carter and Sadie Kane back, not as warriors, but as specialists. They worked with Annabeth in the Athena cabin, comparing ancient texts, trying to find a magical or conceptual weakness in a being who predated magic itself. It was an alliance of incompatible parts, held together by the sheer force of Percy's will and the magnitude of the threat they faced. Percy was the linchpin, the bridge. He spent his days in endless meetings, his enhanced perception allowing him to navigate the treacherous currents of Asgardian pride, House of Life doctrine, and Lyra's deep-seated, logical mistrust. He was no longer just a warrior, he was a statesman. A commander, a living symbol of a unity no one, least of all him, had ever thought possible. But the fragile peace was just the calm before the final storm. It began on the 8th day. The sun did not rise. The world was plunged into a uniform, starless, moonless twilight. It wasn't darkness, it was an absence of light. A profound, soul-crushing gray that muted colors and stole the warmth from the air. From every corner of the globe, panicked reports flooded in through Hephaestus-made communication devices and frantic iris messages. The phenomenon was global. Then, the second sign appeared, high in the gray sky, directly over Olympus, a perfect, black sphere materialized. It was a hole in the heavens, an orb of absolute nothingness that seemed to drink the very idea of light. And from it, a voice spoke. It did not boom or thunder. It was a calm, reasonable, and utterly terrifying whisper that every sentient mind on the planet heard simultaneously. The chaos has been allowed to fester for too long. The experiment of free will is a failure. It has produced only pain, conflict, and entropy. Today, I offer the gift of correction. The gift of peace. The gift of silence. It was Erebus. He had finally shown himself. The black sphere began to expand, slowly, patiently, like a drop of ink on cosmic paper. The world's gods tried to fight back. From Olympus, bolts of lightning, brighter than 1,000 suns, slammed into the sphere and were simply swallowed, vanishing without a trace. Percy saw a brilliant flash of light over the sands of Egypt as the House of Life unleashed the power of Ra, only to see it gutter and die against the encroaching silence. The Bifrost tried to open, to bring the full might of Asgard to bear, but the Ra Inbo bridge fractured and shattered against the gray, empty sky. The gods were being neutralized, their power sources cut off by Erebus's conceptual dominance over the void. They were being unplugged from the universe. He's not attacking us, Annabeth said, her face pale as she stood beside Percy on Half-Blood Hill, watching the black sun grow. He's attacking reality itself. He's rewriting the source code. The despair was a palpable wave, washing over the camp, over the whole world. It was the crushing, undeniable logic of a god who had seen all of time and found it wanting. Hope felt like a childish delusion in the face of such absolute, final authority. This was it, the final battle, and it wouldn't be fought with swords and spears. He will attack your heart, your hope, the bonds you share with others. That is the battlefield. Kyros's words echoed in Percy's mind. He looked at his friends. He saw Grover, terrified but bravely playing a weak, defiant tune on his reed pipes. A song of life against the encroaching silence. He saw Nico, his hand on the hilt of his sword, ready to defend the world that had so often shunned him. He saw Clarice, shouting at her siblings to form a shield wall. A pointless but beautifully defiant gesture. He saw Lyra, her face grim, checking the magazine on her rifle. And he saw Annabeth, who simply met his gaze, her gray eyes a storm of fear, love, and unwavering trust. This was his world, in all its chaotic, noisy, beautiful imperfection. It was worth fighting for. He wants to erase our choices, Percy said, his voice quiet but clear, cutting through the blanket of despair. So we have to make one. We choose to fight. He closed his eyes and reached inward, not to the rage of the Shikatsumyaku or the absolute power of the Rinnegan's destructive paths. He reached for the core of it all. The legacy of a sage who had dedicated countless lifetimes to the belief that people, in all their flawed glory, were worth saving. He reached for the life force. The creative spark, the will of the son of Poseidon who would drown the world for the people he loved. He merged them. He became whole. When he opened his eyes, they were no longer just the Rinnegan. On his forehead, a third eye had opened, its iris red, containing both the tomo of the Sharingan and the ripples of the Rinnegan. The Rinne Sharingan, the Tensagan in his other eyes blazed to life. A celestial blue. He was awash in power, not as a weapon, but as an answer. He rose into the air, a being of impossible light against the gray, dying sky. He was not Percy Jackson anymore. He was a confluence of two universes, a living testament to hope. He did not fly toward the black sun. He turned to face his army, his friends. He offers you silence. Percy's voice boomed, not with amplification, but with the resonance of life itself. I offer you our noise, our laughter, our arguments, our love. He offers you the peace of the grave. I offer you the struggle of life. He offers you a perfect, beautiful prison. I offer you our messy, flawed, wonderful freedom. He raised his hands, and a wave of pure, golden energy washed over them. It wasn't an attack. It was a gift. It was his own chakra, his own life force, his own unyielding hope, shared with every person there. The crushing despair vanished, replaced by a burning, defiant warmth. It was a shield for the soul. Then, he turned to face Erebus. You cannot fight the inevitable, anomaly, the voice whispered in his mind. I am the end of all stories. You're not the end, Percy projected back, high. Thoughts a spear of golden light aimed at the black sun. You're just the final page. And I'm going to write a new book. He ascended, a comet of blue and gold, straight toward the encroaching void. This wasn't a battle he could win by punching. It was a battle of concepts. The concept of silence versus the concept of life. He entered the sphere of nothingness, and his light was almost extinguished. He was in Erebus's domain. A place of perfect, cold, mathematical order. He saw the universe as Erebus saw it. A grand, elegant equation that had been corrupted by the messy variable of consciousness. Erebus appeared before him, not as a monster, but as a perfect, human-shaped figure of pure blackness, his features indistinct, his form absolute. Look at the pain you defend, Erebus said, showing him visions of every war. Every act of cruelty, every moment of heartbreak in human history. Look at the futility. I offer a cure for all of it. You offer a cure for life, Percy countered, his own light flaring. He showed Erebus his own memories. Laughing with his mother over a plate of blue waffles. His first underwater kiss with Annabeth. Grover's goofy bleeding laugh. Nico finding a moment of peace. The fierce, loyal love of his friends. Pain is the price of love. I'll pay it every time. He brought his hands together, summoning the ultimate power of creation. The truth-seeking orbs. Spheres of malleable black energy that could nullify all forms of ninjutsu and magic, materialized behind him. But he did not shape them into weapons. He was the sage's legacy. But he was also a son of the sea god. He understood the power of the tide, not to destroy, but to reshape. He expanded his will, his very being, and began to create. He did not create a weapon to destroy Erebus. He created a world to contain him. Using the orbs as a foundation, he began to weave a new dimension. He poured all his knowledge, all his power, all his memories into it. He created a world with a warm, yellow sun and a silver moon. He created oceans that churned with chaotic, beautiful life. He created mountains and forests and fields of grass that swayed in a gentle breeze. He created a perfect, pristine, empty world. What is this? Erebus asked, his eternal calm finally broken by a flicker of confusion. This is your perfection, Percy said, the strain of creation immense, his own light beginning to flicker. This is your silence, your order, You can have it. You can be the god of this empty world. Rule it, perfect it, but you will leave my world, our world, alone. He pushed the new dimension forward. A bubble of reality that began to envelop the primordial god. Erebus fought back, his power of nothingness trying to unmake Percy's creation, but Percy's world was not based on logic or physics alone. It was based on hope. It was based on love for his own, flawed reality. And that was a concept that Erebus, in all his ancient wisdom, could not comprehend. Percy's creation was a cage made of everything Erebus claimed to want. To fight it would be to admit the hypocrisy of his own philosophy. The new world swallowed him. Percy stood at the precipice, holding the gateway. Between the two realities open with the last of his strength. You have not won, the whisper echoed from within the cage. You have only postponed the inevitable. They will still fight. They will still suffer. Your chaos will consume itself. That's the beauty of it, Percy said, a tired, triumphant smile on his face. It's our chaos to live in. It's our choice. And with a final, desperate act of will, he sealed the gateway. The black sun vanished. In the sky over Earth, a new, brilliant star shone for a single, breathtaking moment before fading. The gray twilight receded, and the warm, familiar light of the true sun broke through the clouds. It was over. Percy fell through the sky, his power expended, his divine form fading, until he was just a boy in a torn t-shirt, plummeting toward the earth. A giant eagle caught him, one of Zeus's own, a silent, grudging acknowledgement from a king who had been saved by the one he feared most. He was laid gently on the grass of Half-Blood Hill. His friends, his army, his whole chaotic world, rushed to his side. Annabeth was there first, her hand on his cheek, her tears tracing paths of clean skin through the grime. The world was saved, but it was not the same. The pantheons had seen each other. The god-killers had fought alongside demigods. The old borders, the old rules, had been irrevocably broken. A new era had begun. Percy looked up at the faces of his friends. At the battered, bruised, but beautifully alive people around him. He was not a god of destruction. He was not a god of creation. He was a protector, a bridge between worlds. He was the son of the sea and the legacy of a sage. He was the god of a new world, a world he had chosen, a world he would have to help rebuild. His journey was far from over. It had just begun. Chapter 10 End.